Cheers, guys.
Chin chin.
Happy to have you guys
Thanks for having us back.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'll do the electricity. Well, here, we can do it this way.
All right.
Right on, yeah. You know what's funny? I actually opened up this morning the last 5 sets of notes we have. Can you turn my volume up a little more?
Yep.
The last 5 sets of notes that we have from our shows, and I kind of skimmed through it. That's good. Thank you. And just to like refresh my memory. And I realized there's an awful lot to talk about.
Oh, there's so much.
Like way too much.
Wait, really? I mean, we're on one particular tack of this, and then what it's going to mean. Will there be a 2028 election? I mean, that's a serious question to ask.
Do you think that that's legitimate, or do you
Yes.
think a little bit of that is fear-based?
Have you ever read about how Hitler came to power in Germany? It's really worth reading. The rise and fall of the Third Reich is really good, but there are a whole bunch of others to read, things to read. Albert Speer, Inside the Third Reich. They talk about how he came to power. Hitler wasn't Hitler until he was Hitler. I mean, it was just, and nobody thought that this would happen. And most people who voted for Hitler did not hate Jews. I mean, you got to.
We're so not talking about this today.
I know. I'm just saying.
All roads
you
lead back
read
to
about authoritarianism coming to power in every country. It's because not enough people see it coming. And the ones who do hightailed it out of Germany
and
early.
I'll just add to this one thing, just so maybe we will talk about it someday personally. I need to go down a little bit on the volume. Sorry. When I looked into this stuff, the military of Germany was the aristocrats,
Right.
and they were way against it, way. And then they kind of saw the writing on the wall, and then they were the reason that was able actually to happen, because they owned everything, them and their families, right? Just like in the history of the Catholic Church, these large families had both merchant siblings and relatives, and monastic siblings. So your brother could be a priest or a merchant or a soldier, for that matter, right? So same thing in Germany, because it wasn't that far removed. 1880s, the Kaiser, 1920s, wasn't that far removed from the old ways. In Germany, Hitler, everyone's like, oh, Hitler wrote, Mein Kampf in
but
jail.
nobody read it.
In jail.
Yeah.
The aristocrats at that point had been like, we're co-opting that dude. He was in a castle, right?
That was his jail.
Yeah. He's in a castle, and he's got like, just picture a bad movie where people are like, this is our guy. How do we do this thing? That's not an often told story.
No, and you know the story of how the Enabling Act was passed? Or do you know what the Enabling Act? I mean, Hitler was appointed chancellor by Hindenburg in January. Then there is the burning of the Reichstag. You've probably heard of a lot of claims that it's false flag, or maybe not, but a crazy communist guy was attributed to it. And Hitler used that to basically shut down the Communist Party at that time. The Communist Party, of course, had refused to coalition with the Social Democrats because of their past history that got, Rosa Luxemburg killed and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of bad blood there, but Stalin told him, do not do that. They're social fascist, blah, 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 which was really ironic considering it was coming down the peak. So the KPD, the Communist Party, gets essentially banned. They're gone. They're out of the parliament. And it's then a group of about, 5, 6, 7 moderate to conservative parties that then he wins the election. He gets with a plurality, which that's not necessarily a bad thing in parliamentary systems. A party with the plurality then can put together a coalition and win. And it came together with 2 conservative parties, and which of course would disappear within a year. And and then afterwards, to give him his chancellorhood almost absolute power to be able to clean up the mess because of what happened with the burning of the Reichstag, which was as shocking as 9/11, was in modern times. They gave him almost absolute power, thinking that, well, once he's in this position where he has to govern, and he has to govern for the whole people, he will moderate. And you've famous last words from people who weren't writing much a few years later because they were in jail or dead, right? I mean, it just was, and and then you had the whole Strasser brothers element of the left that supported him. They were anti-Semitic as hell. That's why. They ended up being killed, or, well, one of them got out, but the other one got killed in the Night of Long Knives when they got rid of it because Hitler came to resent the fact that socialism was in the very Nazi name. And it was because of the Strasser brothers, apparently, that was the case. So it's, but nobody thought this would happen. Everybody thought he would moderate because, when you come to power, all of a sudden you got responsibilities that you didn't have when you could just be an ideologue on the outside and the rest. And it had all of the checks and balances that a parliamentary system should have. Nobody expected that to happen. So do I think it's going to happen here? No. But can it happen here? Yes, there's nothing magic about our society that's different from all those societies that doesn't let it happen. He tested the systems of checks and balances and pushed them almost to their limits the last time. They're going to have to really stand up this time. But unfortunately, anybody within the Republican Party who had any guts to stand up to him is out.
But I think the hypothetical question of can it happen is almost mute because it can happen with any president, right? We've had a number of different presidents that have pushed the bounds in various ways. I think it's a little bit reductive at this point. There's a lot of people, this is the problem. There's a lot of people who have low information, which you guys are not in,
right?
Who say Trump is a fascist, he's Hitler 2.0,
right? And
they have no idea what they're talking about. And you ask them, okay, what has he done that makes you think that? And they go, oh, well, have you seen his tweets? You're like, oh no.
There's January 6th. There's what he tried to do with Eastman and writing up the blueprints. He had a plan to stay in power. It was a stupid plan and it didn't work, but it was a plan to stay in power against Biden's election.
Not to interrupt you, I'll just add so then we could get going probably, right? But Eric has said several times, right, we've done a lot of shows together by now, that, hey, if there's another election, I tend to not engage because I think it's both funny and scary, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, to say it's funny, then I laugh along. To say it's scary, it's because you both pointed to it's not impossible. It's absolutely not impossible. But you were like, but is it likely? No, it's not. It's not likely. But it's very, very possible.
But consider. There was one historian who, after the election, said, I give it only a 5% chance. Right. Don't worry about that. People go to Vegas and Reno to bet on worse odds than that. So, if somebody was to hand you a sandwich and say, there's about a 5% chance that it's got, it poisoned with bacteria that will kill you, but, it tastes really good. 95% chance that, you'll be fine. Would you eat the sandwich? No.
No, I'm not taking a chance.
So one more thing on this is that Neil deGrasse Tyson was just on Bill Maher last night, and he said, there was and I forget the number of years, but he's like, there was 100-year gap between when mankind invented calculus, which is a very complicated math science, and when we invented probability. So in other words, our brains are not wired for understanding probability and risk. We are not. We're way more emotional. We're way more survivalist, and our brains process information in a way where we rally around the alpha. Any attack on the alpha is attack on ourselves, and that explains like cults of personality. So our own hard wiring of brains, of how we process information, but also the beliefs, how we're hardwired for beliefs, which is that most of our beliefs are formulated or way early in life, to the point where once we reach, like, for example, they say car insurance for men is much more expensive than women between 18 and 25 because men can't process risk yet. We still haven't grown up. We haven't, but by then, let's just say somewhere between 18 and 25, we're not going to change our beliefs. What's his name? Oh my God, Julia and Bob Frelich.
Oh, Bob Frelich, yeah.
Their show.
Creative thinking or not creative?
Thinking clearly. Thinking clearly. Yeah.
Oh, I've listened to a couple.
Yeah.
of those.
So they had a neuroscientist on from some school in Michigan.
You should have them on here, by the way.
Aren't they out of Redway? Are they local?
No, well, Julia works up here, but she also lives down there, so she could come in here. Bob Froelich, I think, moved out of the area and pipes it in, but he could probably be here too. I would invite them. I'll give you their card.
Yeah, if you have their, I've tried to find them. I don't think I could ever find their contact information.
I think I've got my card in my wallet. I'll give it to you afterwards.
So one of the questions that was asked on that show was, so it sounds like what you're saying is it's pretty hopeless. Adults are not going to change the way they think. And he's like, well, there's this one kind of backdoor way to get people to change their beliefs, which is the subconscious level. You can't undo cause and effect. So when you get burned on a stove, it gets imprinted in your brain. And then when you're just about to reach the hot stove, your subconscious is like, dude, you touched it and you got burned, and you pause for a second. You can still override it with your conscious thought. Oh, I still want to touch it. I'm drunk. I don't need, whatever. But your subconscious is like, no, you learned that lesson, cause and effect. You learned it. Tries to remind us. We can hack our brain if we are disciplined in learning. And we try to learn, and we try to grow. Cause and effect. If we eventually, we can rewire our processing. He's like, it's just so rare. And so I talked to other people about this. Like if you, not to bring it up, but if you look at how Rachel Maddow structures her shows on MSNBC, she has a point. She goes on and then she revisits it. And then she makes a point and then she revisits it. And then she makes a point and then she revisits it. She's trying to brainwash her audience.
Oh yeah, I wasn't sure where you were going there for a second.
Yeah. So she's trying to, but not like that's just
right.
From her perspective, she's an effective host.
Well, it's a byproduct of the format.
Yeah,
right?
like, exactly. Like I'm not trying to say there's no value judgment. No, it's the type of approach.
It comes from somebody who was over there that said, "Look what Fox News is doing."
Yeah,
and but they've already got that market cornered. So let's go to the other side and see if we can make money that way.
I'm just saying as a model. If you like, for me personally, I don't do that on my show because I'm not a professional. I'm not disciplined enough to plan early enough ahead. I don't say I have a mission to tell my audience to try to make them think what I think. I don't do any of that. I just kind of roll with it. Like we roll with it. Yeah. But the point is that unless you have a concerted, structured technique that you implement, your audience is not going to agree with anything that you say unless they already agree with it.
Well, part of that is dependent on how you initially build that audience, right? It's like that.
Fox.
But it's like touching the stove. If you have an audience that knows they're going to disagree with you, but you honestly believe what you're saying, and you have a track record of sticking to your guns and maybe changing your opinions based on information changing, then they're not going to turn against you though.
Yeah,
but there are people who have done that, not necessarily in the mainstream media.
Sure.
But podcasters that have done that and have built a following, and people know I'm not always going to agree with you.
I don't think it's actually fixed, because I think that we what we need really is somebody to do a study of people who have changed their minds. And how and why.
It's called cult deprogramming. It's a very difficult effort.
But even other than that, people have done it on their own. For instance, there's that old saying, a conservative is a liberal who's been mugged. And then there's always been the counter, well, a left-winger is a conservative who's had a run-in with the police, right? I mean, there's a lot of, so you've got traumatic events that do this.
Totally trauma.
9/11 changed a lot of people, Dennis Miller and Chris Hitchens and, a bunch of other people that we kind of respect. But
we shouldn't have to be prisoners in a
no, I got it. But there are
people tortured to change our mind.
But there are people who are, on the last show we were here, I talked about Kepler, right? There are people who train their minds to do it, and they have changed their minds over time. There is, if you have a chance to listen to it, David Brooks on the New York Times podcast.
We'll talk about this today.
Yeah, talks about how he changed his mind. He agrees, and he says, and I don't agree with myself as I'm saying this, but Bernie Sanders is right. Yeah. We need a populism. We need to, do this.
And James Carville said the same.
David Brooks Maybe her too, but David Brooks, has been a Republican conservative columnist for the New York Times for decades. He used to be kind of reactionary,
farthest left moderate in their party.
He really is. He is, and but it's the same with Kevin Phillips. Kevin Phillips is less known today. I think he just died actually in the last couple of years. He was the architect of Nixon's Southern strategy to take advantage of the fact that that John Hudson had signed the Civil Rights Bill. Let's see if we can go down and get all the white people to switch parties from the Democratic to the Republican. And it did work. By the time Reagan was in office, it was like 80% of whites in the South, and I think it's 90% today. So it did work. This is a guy who was a partisan soldier. But he went through the Reagan era, and he was a scholar and he studied. And by the 1990s, he said, you know what? No, this is wrong. This is affecting these right-wing policies are negatively affecting the middle class. We're losing the middle class. We're going to lose more over the next couple of decades to the jobs leaving. And this is all because policy is focused around money, around people who make a lot of money. And this is a guy who intellectually came to that conclusion gradually. I remember when Barbara Ehrenreich, who's pretty much a leftist, announced it at an event in Berkeley, said, we've actually won somebody over, Kevin Phillips. And it was real interesting. And then after that, I started reading his stuff, and it's amazing. You wouldn't know he was ever a conservative. But except that he does talk with that language.
My line of thinking right now is that if we're going to frame this how everybody frames this, the best of two evils, I think Trump is a safer bet right now, given the track record of the Biden administration and how closely, obviously, Kamala was tied to that. I think it's good to have some sort of a shakeup, and I think Trump is the shakeup in this case.
Why didn't he shake it up when he had the chance 16-20?
Well, you could make the argument
that he tried,
and that, he's not a politician. He didn't understand the game, so he came onto the scene and just accepted other people's opinions. Oh, I should do this because so-and-so is an expert here. Let me kind of feed off them a little bit more. I do like who he has around him now. I think it's hard to argue against Tulsi and Elon Musk and RFK. I'm a fan of those individuals, so I might have a little bias there. Yeah. But I think that is better than the people that were around him initially. The question is he going to stick with those people once he actually takes office?
Well, I hope not, because I have never liked Tulsi. Even
you don't like Tulsi?
Left-winger, no. I she has a history, a very reactionary history. She's right, then left, and now right again. She pretended to be left-wing so she could get elected in Hawaii because that's where she lived. That's what she did. She's a reactionary to the core. And putting her in charge of the intelligence, you think that's going to lead to more isolationism? It's not. It's just going to be selective. What we're going to do, we'll go back to the days where we were undermining democratically elected leftists, not communists who took over, but people like Allende, people like Manley in Jamaica, and the rest.
What about her foreign policy stance makes you think that, or makes you inclined to believe that she would?
Because of her ideological position, and because that's what Trump wants. He is, even last time around, he associated with dictators because that's what he wants to be.
But you could argue that was a good thing because he smoothed over a lot of the ailments with Kim Jong-un. I mean, he made a lot of progress that even Obama couldn't
make.
Like
what?
He's got 100 nuclear weapons now. I mean, Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, what did he accomplish?
North Korea got what it wanted
Jong-un?
out of the relationship.
What did he do other than we like each other?
Well, relations were better. Tensions were significantly more hostile when Obama was in, without a doubt. I'm not talking about the last 4 years under Biden.
Right.
So we're moving fast through a lot of things and not getting very deep.
Yeah. But the problem I have with Musk is, I think he owns the administration. I don't think that. I mean, he was involved in the phone call with Zelenskyy, for crying out loud. Why would he even be involved in that? It's not, and it's just other than he wants to dictate this. As far as I'm concerned, if any agreement involves any surrender of land to Russia, that's Anschluss all over again. That's because it won't end there. He'll just wait until Putin will just wait until Trump is out of office, and then he'll push forward for the rest of Ukraine. He won't disrupt it because he can get what he wants from Trump.
So this is a good segue. We can touch on Ukraine for a second.
Sure.
Do you think that Putin is an expansionist at his core and does want to build the Soviet Union back to some extent?
Not the Soviet Union. I think he wants greater Russia that existed before World War I. He's not a communist.
But you don't buy into the fact of NATO expansion?
No,
because
he will negotiate to allow Ukraine into NATO if he gives up if Zelenskyy gives up Crimea and Donetsk.
Has he publicly stated that?
I guarantee that he doesn't care about NATO.
But NATO has always been his red line. For Ukraine specifically, has always been
that's
the line.
That's the line they have to take. But he doesn't care. It doesn't matter if missiles are in Ukraine or not. The missiles, today's cruise missiles, can be in Britain, can be in a submarine in the middle of the Atlantic, or they could be in Ukraine. It's the same effect. It doesn't matter. It's not like the 1963 Cuban Missile Crisis when those missiles could make a difference, and so we agreed.
I think it's reasonable to take a half step back. I mean, we're on now. Like we're
going.
Okay.
We're going,
yeah. Context, right? End of World War II. It's the whole world is framed Cold War.
Right.
The whole world is governed by institutions created by the West, with the U.S. in the lead. Key partners, NATO, building out all sorts of economic institutions through Switzerland that have to do with finance and insurance and banking and commerce and trade and other institutions through Vienna, like, when you look at the non-proliferation treaties, and there are many, many global institutions put in place. Of course, the United Nations and et cetera, right? All framed around the West winning, and Russia being sort of this, communist, boogeyman, to sort of, threat to all of the Western capitalist vision of how the world ought to be integrated. If you watch anything, they do. Frontline did a great special on Putin, and he was actually like traumatized. He feels that Russia was embarrassed and worse, and that this was his whole worldview is basically framed around what can I do now that the Soviet Union's gone and Russia needs to rebuild. There was a degree of, I'm just going to use the word in quotes, sellout. From the West was, okay, we can figure out how to as the Soviet Union fell, privatize that, get them integrated. Oligarchy was established. A very small group of people got ownership rights, consolidated power. And it became, in effect, similar to like a kleptocracy around organized crime. Putin transitioned to a role in St. Petersburg where he was one of the key point people from the intelligence community. I don't know how much active agency to put on him, whether he was a mastermind or whether he was just the beneficiary. There's scholars will tell us how that all actually played out someday. But he ended up being one of the he's one of the richest people in the world, skimming a cut of everything from one of the most resource-rich countries in, 11 time zones, 2/3 of the world's resources in Russia, right? All that oil, all that gas. And so, just to kind of fast forward to today, why does this matter? Just as a general principle, and I would say not unlike Donald Trump, he sees the world from almost a narcissistic vantage point, what is most beneficial to him being the champion, the next, Peter the Great type character. And we don't have to get too far in the weeds on this, right, other than to say that, like, where does that lead to now? Yes, there was this idea that NATO was going to, and the European Union's growth, economic and military, incorporate more and more parts of Europe that were taken away from that sphere of influence into a more modern, progressive, left-leaning, Western, liberal, progressive, not just worldview, but like system. And so it's a battle of systems. And Putin, I think, sees himself in part as the champion of the dissent. And so like you mentioned Tulsi, and people are like, oh, she's an apologist, or anybody that gives any kind of like realpolitik, in other words, like, how is this really going to affect things? Anybody that looks at that, at the world in that prism, gets criticized as saying, well, why would you give Russia and Putin credibility? Why would you give them the benefit of the doubt? It's a bipolar tug of war. We can't have one system where they get incorporated, but they disagree with how the system is set up. So they were. I'll say one more thing. They were. The United States has cut Russia off from the system now to punish them. So it's not just like you can't fly over their airspace. You have to fly around. They can't use the banking system. Everybody that has money and influence within Russia's system because they've shut down dissent. They've shut down democracy. There's so many things that are again that go. I was going to use a big word, but go against the way we look at the world. That people are like, see, it's so obvious he's so wrong. It's so obvious he's so evil. And so that whole from most mainstream perspectives, it's like you can't negotiate with him. You can't care what he thinks. You can't care what he wants. He's actually the enemy. And so I think Tulsi finds herself in that middle space where she's like, yeah, but NATO expansion, right? NATO expansion. If we just didn't do that, we were never not going to do that, right? So that
doesn't justify, if you push somebody to the brink and then you don't like the actions that occur because of that. That's not an excuse to blame the person. Say, oh, they're just some crazy dictator. Who's hell-bent on expansion.
He's not a crazy dictator. He's not crazy. He's very shrewd and very brilliant, and it's calculated. But if what I encourage people to do is go back and listen to the translation of his speech that he made several days before they invaded Ukraine. Oh well, they had already invaded Ukraine, but went further in, and he talks about how he does something that is different. Now, the society is not communist at this point, but they still revere Lenin. Lenin is revered. He attacked Lenin in that speech, and he praised Stalin. Stalin has not been revered. He praised Stalin because the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the worst thing that ever happened in the world, not because it was a collapse of communism, but because Russia lost its influence throughout Eastern Europe. And all of a sudden, all these Baltic countries are in NATO, Poland's in NATO, and now, of course, Ukraine will be in NATO if we allow it to happen. But he slammed Lenin because Lenin let Finland go. He says we need to get Finland back. We need to reclaim this. Lenin, in order to compromise, in order to survive actually during World War I, gave up Finland. And that, he says, is one of the biggest things. Now, if he's trying to alter the narrative to all of a sudden, he's not just like, doing like a president here would do, invoke George Washington and Lincoln, great leaders. He's trying to turn the narrative and to turn people against the image of Lenin because Lenin was not an expansionist. And in fact, he was whatever the opposite is. I don't want to say reductionist, but something else. Because he gave that up. He would not do that if he didn't have expansionist intentions. That is the whole point of that speech. And a few days later, he pulled in from Russia and what's the country in the north again? Begins with a anyway,
Belarus.
What? Belarus. Yeah, thank you. And of course that part went badly for him. Is he lying? Is that just a ruse so that he has an ideology, but he really just wants to shore up what he has and maintain power there? I can't say that's not to 100%. I can't say, but why attack a figure like Lenin, who's basically like our Lincoln in our in our history there, even among people who aren't communists? He saved from the Tsar and kept Germany from winning the war by working out that detail.
So I think I wish it wasn't three, but there's at least three things worth context. One, just big picture. When Russia invaded Crimea, I remember Henry Kissinger spoke publicly, who he died at 100. He was back in the Ford administration, right, and like the foreign policy expert, national security advisor, considered
Nixon.
Yeah, Nixon, exactly. He got his PhD in the Treaty of Westphalia, right? So the Germanic region of Europe the principalities and the duchies and they all were fighting against each other to a certain extent, even though they were aristocrats. It's pre-Germany. And the Treaty of Westphalia was like, hey, look, if I want to get my goods and services from this part of the land to that part of the land, and I got to go through 5 places, I'm oversimplifying magnificently, right? But why would we have our knights fight each other and along the way when we could just agree to engage in commerce? And so all the different Germanic regions got together and were like, let's have a Treaty of Westphalia. Let's think a little bit more modern in how the idea of a state, a proto-state in effect, right? So Henry Kissinger understood you got to meet people where they are, and you got to talk to their most base of base diplomatic concerns. And so what he said was Crimea is their only warm water port. Russia's only warm water port. That's where their navy is traditionally. And there's other things we could get in the weeds on this, but the idea is that for whatever reason, Putin believed we need Crimea. So that invasion happened. And Henry Kissinger's like, it's not a strategic necessity for the West to keep Russia out of Crimea. Let's basically the Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Obama was president. Don't go to war over this. Give them their port. It could have gone different ways. He didn't have to put in these, they were called little green men. They were soldiers without insignia. And so basically mercenaries came in, took over the place so that the Russian military bases could then say, oh, well, really the Russian-speaking people of this community want it to be Russia. He was successful. Bottom line, he was successful. And then he thought, well, let's connect these Russian-speaking regions, the Donbass. And so that ultimate invasion is this southeastern section connecting the Donbass Russian-speaking region across to Crimea. And that's just on a map. That's just great power thinking. Let's just have this region for ourselves. I'm not saying, I'm not putting value judgment on it, but that's the sort of on a map strategic thing that happened. Think fast forward to today. Well, let's just say this. Adults, have to be able to have 2 ideas in their head at one time, like Tom Sawyer, the lesson of Tom Sawyer, right? Well, it's not fair that my friend Jim, who's the slave, is being, has this problem, but at the same time, wait, he did this, right?
Huckleberry Finn.
Huckleberry Finn, right? Exactly, right? So that's what the Tom Sawyer, Mark Twain. The idea is there can be 2 moral things happening, and a person has to figure out how to manage that. So with NATO, it's look. The Greco-Roman, Anglo-American arc of history, Western civilization, this just happens to be the space where it's playing out. And so Putin has his agenda, his game, his tactics, and the West is like, no, that's part of the United Nations that we don't reward aggression. That's our first principle here, basically. So that's what's in conflict. So anybody who says, hey, wait, blame NATO that somebody used aggression to take over territory, it's never going to be NATO's fault. Hard stop. So that's kind of the rub. So almost the way last time it was real. I thought it was very uncomfortable to try to talk about the Israeli-Palestine thing just because it's so deep.
We got to pivot into that.
Yeah, yes. It's just so deep, right? And
because that war is going to be expanded under
this.
Trump.
This is one of those things, and I think this war. I think the war in Ukraine will end up being settled according to Trump the way he says he's going to do it, regardless of what our first principles are. And it's going to be a compromise. I mean, who knows, right? This is a contingent reality.
We don't know.
We're hobbyists,
there's
right?
a bunch of things that are in play that might thwart that.
And the biggest,
but is it NATO's fault? Absolutely not. It's a crazy, not crazy. It is an aggressive foreign policy, nationalistic. Let's build up the national morale of the country because the people of Russia, their life expectancy dropped from 73 like us to 54. People were fleeing the country. It's a totalitarian state. One last thing. Remember, I said there's 3 things.
And without an ideology, it's just power now. There's no communism.
Exactly, power and fear. When Putin was in the KGB in Eastern Europe, that's when Eastern Europe was one of the most ridiculous places to have lived in modern history because the Stasi had spies in your house, in your school, in your church, in your company. People were spying on each other. They figured out it was one of the worst. Eastern Germany was terrible for the people who lived there because of the totalitarian nature of the Russian intelligence community. That's where Putin was trained, right? So that's what he brings to the table. He brings to the table that that idea that, hey, if people think differently than I do what I got to do. So that's why they called Ukraine Nazis. They're like, Ukraine's not Nazis.
Well, they do have a Nazi brigade. I mean,
the Azov brigade has
a
Nazis
legitimate
in it.
Nazi.
I tried to.
Yeah.
My point is that it's not a Nazi regime. We could talk about the unfolding of the Ukraine presidency.
There's a lot going on there.
It's a whole other thing.
Azov actually has resentment because Zelenskyy did send them to the front, and most of them were decimated.
It's an opportunistic misreading of history to project that on the country of Ukraine.
Right.
Basically.
But it is, to say that NATO's not a factor at play in all of this, I think is a bit out there.
I'm saying it's not the cause. You said
at all?
No.
If someone...
It really isn't. It's because he doesn't care.
He might, if you take that at face value that he doesn't care, there is a strong historical line where he has said that he does care, and that even people in our own government, all the way up to the CIA director, have said throughout the decades, NATO expansion cannot hit Ukraine. Ukraine is a red line for Putin. I mean, that's been well documented.
I'm not aware, but I look at that.
So if you look at strategically, like there's a vast open plain where basically during the Cold War, the idea was that if Russia built enough tanks, they could just roll in and do whatever they want to do in Europe. So NATO is that Iron Curtain, right? The Iron Curtain was the idea like, hey, there's nothing going to pass through here. People have said, just to give credence to what you said, people have said, like, if you look at the Snowden, the WikiLeaks, Julian Assange. So one of the released recordings that was publicly shared through New York Times and shared through, I think, Deutsche Welle or Agency Free Press or The Guardian, right? So we're not talking about the stuff that is classified. We're talking about unclassified. You're allowed to talk about it. You're allowed to look at it and read it without being, a criminal of some kind, right? So Hillary Clinton was in a conversation where she was basically, there was a diplomatic cable where, I'm not going to name the name of the person because I don't need to vilify her, but somebody who's responsible for Ukraine was saying, "Oh, we'll just pick the prime minister, and we'll do what we need to do to get that person in power in Ukraine," right? So that if you're Russian, you're like, wait, you guys are picking the next leader, you're helping to pick the next leader of the country. Secondarily to that, there was a document where Ukraine was going to be brought into the EU, basically for economic reasons. But there was a line item in there that's like, oh, by the way, if you're going to be in the EU, you're going to be able to support NATO. And that to me, that's the most provocative thing of the whole problem here. The most provocative element is the assumption that, hey, if Ukraine really is going to be a neutral state, and a bridge between the two systems because of it's the breadbasket of the region, and so much of the world gets food from there, and and so much energy flows through there, and it's just historically just a significant, like you said, it's a key strategic point in the geography. The West was like, we're going to do what we want to do, and Russia's like, we're going to do what we can do to stop it. I mean, so NATO is like, it's not the critical element. It's not like, again, so many people disagree or have different opinions, right? But I think to be an apologist for the West is what Tulsi's been, to be an apologist for Putin, which is what Tulsi's been accused of. I just think she's a disruptor. I think it's appropriate to be a disruptor, particularly when, which is what I circle back around to the big picture. I thought we were going to talk about the election and the
we haven't gotten there.
Transition.
We'll get there. But.
But I think that this is just one tiny piece of the puzzle that explains all of these things that we're about to see over the coming months, which is that there is we've reached that point where there's a disagreement about, are we going to continue with the status quo, or are we going to engage the disruptors?
I don't think there are people on both left and right who do disagree with me about Putin being expansionist. Their view is that he has to stay in power or he's going to be arrested and maybe even killed for all of his crimes, right? And so there's an analysis that he'll do whatever he has to stay in power. Well, if that means taking Ukraine, it means taking Ukraine. If it means giving up Ukraine but claiming some sort of victory, he'll do it as long as he doesn't have to leave power, because he knows that the minute he does that, he's lost at least his freedom, if it's not his life. And there may be something to that. It's certainly, we're seeing that now around the world. Netanyahu has to keep this war going because he doesn't want to end up in jail, right? And Trump had to win the presidency so he could stay out of jail. I mean, it's just, that we are seeing this. Bolsonaro, I don't know if you've seen the recent things, but he's being charged now with attempted coup and plotting to assassinate Lula. So it's there is a pattern to this, and so I don't want to discount that might be his motivation more than any grandiose idea of restoring Greater Russia. I don't know for a fact that this is
and let's just to say from the perspective of people on the ground, like I have friends and colleagues in countries all along that border, they don't want the totalitarian return of what the Soviet Union had imposed in their history ever again. So from the Western perspective, from the NATO perspective, it's a human rights, I don't know what exactly to call it. It's an imperative of Western values to prevent a totalitarian, let's say it this way, an authoritarian person who has proven not to respect what our Western tradition aspires to. Like it's transgenerational.
And in Belarus and Georgia, he's already doing it. So.
But I think a lot of that is this idea of imposing Western morals is subjective.
But this is Europe. These are European countries. So we're not talking about
it'd be different
China
But it would be different if it was a European conflict, strictly. But it's not, because we're involved. And we're the primary supplier and the primary funder. So this is an American conflict abroad, in Europe. If the Europeans want to engage in this war and want to continue it and escalate it to whatever desire they have, let them do it. It's on their continent. We don't have control over these sovereign nations. I think the fact that it's Americans abroad doing this.
But we've already gotten farther now than people get publicly, right? Like what you just said is, if it's truly a European imperative and they truly want to draw the line and do that,
but that's the propaganda.
But the world isn't like that anymore.
But we're swimming in a lot of propaganda around both wars.
When it comes to money and weapons and the global world order, there's no distinction really between Europe and us.
Oh no, that's my point.
Yeah,
that's my point. Is to try to make this out as some universal imperative. It's not. It's an American imperative, and we obviously have a lot of sway throughout Europe, Germany, and the UK.
It's a world thing now. Russia has allies in Africa,
but all of that is subsequent because of our decision to pursue this to the current predicament. I mean, BRICS wouldn't have formed had this not happened. I think that's safe to say.
Well, okay. So I mean, I think.
But wait, I want to back up.
Yeah, we were about to pivot when you said BRICS. It's all another thing. It has to do with that global economic order.
Yes, but you brought up this idea of disruptors, and maybe because I'm young, I don't have the experience of a few more years quite yet. I don't think of these individuals as disruptors. I think of them as nuanced individuals who are kind of laying out a multifaceted problem. And in our day and age, for whatever reason, there is no room for nuance, especially when it comes to Putin. You can't have a nuanced perspective of, maybe there was some NATO at play, maybe there was some expansionist desires. It has to just be cut and dry. Putin is a bad guy. He's an evil dictator, and we have to go to war again. There has to be some way to vilify him to the extreme.
I'll say one quick thing and then I'll defer to Eric here.
Sure.
There's this guy from the 50s, a political theorist named Schumpeter, right? And so one of the things that he had said is, in effect, I'm oversimplifying as we do in these formats, right? But it's okay that so few people vote in America because so few people are qualified to vote. And we wouldn't actually want people who don't know anything about stuff to choose our leaders who choose our policies. Like, that's a very oversimplification. It's just one of the things that he said. But the idea is that, look, elite people know what's up. Elite people make the decisions. Elite people are ... Like that whole line of thinking. That's kind of the unstated premise of like, when you had only 3 news channels and they told you what to think and they interpreted things for you. And most people didn't pay that attention and most people didn't care. Now we've got lots of news, not so much interpretation, lots of caring. So there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of ideas, and there's not a lot of checks and balances on the system. So the system in effect is saying, like, let's just do what we're going to do. I don't want to say the term propaganda because absolutely not. It's the war of ideas. It's the scientific method, so to speak, when it comes to political philosophy, economic philosophy. But really, now the idea of a disruptor, I would say, is people like you. You use the word nuance. I'm going to say disagree with nuance. I would say something different and say alternatives. So that some like RFK, right? RFK Jr. He's stepping up and say, I've heard him say some off the wall things that are, I'm like, oh my goodness, that poor guy. But I want to give him the benefit of the doubt. I heard him once really challenged and actually defend himself in a way that made sense. He said, right now the pharmaceutical industry gets liberties that if the American people understood, they probably wouldn't get those liberties. And we don't have to get into the weeds too much to say that Trump was like, that guy is a disruptor. Yeah. Like, I like that he's a disruptor. He's going to step up and say, even though Trump's probably going to do whatever the pharmaceutical industry wants, but who knows? Or the food industry, right? Make America healthy again. There's some big battles that are going to come about when people say, look at the food supply. Look at what we're doing on I'm not even going to name a particular industry. Point is, across drugs, across food, across all these things, huge fights have been won by default, by the moneyed interest, the captive people in government, and the media that just sort of a for-profit media that is in alignment with that, right? But now I'm just going to use the term loosely, and then I'll stop here. But disruptors, this is happening because there's so many voices and so few arbiters of what is to be. And now I think Trump is in place to say, I like that disruptor. I like that disruptor.
But see, I think the pivot is that the idea that these elites who were voting and who were in control could be trusted. I think this is all endemic of the fact that people don't buy that anymore.
They don't?
But for a legitimate reason, right?
This election proved it.
But it's a legitimate strife.
Right? It just means they've switched who they have absolute faith in. They believe Trump because he's Trump, period. That's it. I mean, that's the way they will even believe that he didn't say something, that he's, I talk to people who.
It's not nuance, right?
Right.
Definitely
not nuance.
No, I didn't mean nuance when it came to Trump. I think the people like Tulsi was the example that came to mind. I don't think she's a disruptor. I think she has, specifically for the Russia problem right now, I think she has a nuanced opinion on what is happening, and people are just degrading her to, she's just a disruptor.
You saw the Walsh-Vance debate, right?
Yes.
And you remember the part where they got to the experts, and Vance says, well, we know better than the medical experts. Everybody knows better than the medical experts. I mean, RFK could lead to a lot of death if we have another pandemic.
But that's a legitimate strife to have. Right. The medical experts came out and said, if you want to touch on COVID, came out and backed that 100%. It came out to be false. Yeah, I think that was a big catalyst for why people are skeptical about
the catalyst.
But, but
that's not the only case. You could go to WMDs.
Point
there
out
are a number of cases.
We should be lucky that his uncle was president in the early 1960s rather than him if he was that old, because his uncle is responsible for the development of the whole vaccine technology, beginning with the polio. So it's and outright, there's policy positions he hasn't really been called to account for. Do you agree with your uncle on that? Now, there are a lot of anti-vax people who say, well, I'm for the polio vaccine, but not for the, and we'll see. But in general, the movement behind them doesn't want to have their kids taking any vaccine.
But the vaccine, the industry back when, JFK and RFK were around is completely different than what it is today. You're talking about
always big money.
Yeah, but back then they had 5 vaccines, and now kids get 72 or something before they're 2 years old.
We could get into nuance here.
But I'm just, all right. We don't have to touch on the vaccines
we don't have to.
My point being there is that the experts have proven, and people I think are fully rejecting that idea of the expert. And rightly so, to some degree, because the experts have been proven not to know what they're talking about, or have been bought, or have changed their opinions for monetary gain.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I really don't think we can apply that to science.
Okay, but
it's
you do have science that has been co-opted, right? You could point at the
we have science that has been co-opted in terms of adopting certain technologies over others.
No, but
and that is
ignoring legitimate science.
Let's stick with COVID.
Propaganda. Well, look at the trans stuff. That's another prime example. Right? The data shows, which is why they withheld that most recent study.
I'm not sure.
There was a study that came out that essentially proved that undergoing these surgeries. It does nothing for mental health. It does nothing to stop suicide. And they withheld the publication of that study because it goes against the narrative. Which is something that people could tell you.
I'm not aware of that. I do know that the suicides don't go down because they're treated just the same before and after.
That's kind of a cop. Because you,
we don't know the study is what I would say.
Fair enough. I feel confident putting me out on the ledge, saying it seems pretty conclusive that the science does not prove what the propaganda essentially has been pushing, that this is the solution.
I mean, the propaganda for trans should be, I'm an individual. I make the decision myself. I'm the best possible person to know what I am and who I am.
But then that counteracts your whole theory.
No,
on
it doesn't, because it's not because in terms of backing the quote unquote trans agenda, it's you're backing the individual's decision, not some societal expectation as to what their decision should be. The people who don't want to have the surgery don't have to have the surgery. The people who do want it,
should have the education and the data available to know if this is going to be impactful.
But in terms of, well, is it going
Dave's
to make,
over here. He's getting ready.
Is it going to make you less suicidal? I mean, that's a total. If anybody was making that claim that it's going to make them less suicidal, the reason most of so many of them are suicidal, one of the highest groups in the country, is based on how they're treated. If they have their surgery, they're not going to be treated any better. They may even be treated worse. And that's the problem, is the lack of tolerance in society. I think it's pretty obvious from the case, because that's what people are saying when they're committing suicide. So they're the experts on that. Well, it's them. They're the one, listen to what they're saying.
But then that counteracts your whole point on the idea of experts, because if the individual is an expert, then that applies across the board. They should be able to decide if they want a vaccine, if they want to have a surgery, if they want to go to war for a foreign country.
There's a big difference on being an expert as to what somebody's state of mind is going to be in terms of a change, and whether or not a vaccine is going to kill a virus that's causing a pandemic. Those are two very different concepts. So but again, and the whole trans issue, I mean, that was, you have that ad that was really effective.
Brilliant targeting.
Yeah, no, it really was. It's the same type of thing that was used, to maintain segregation in the 50s, and it worked for a while.
I think this one's more legitimate than that one was.
Well, in 20 years, you're going to be saying otherwise. And Republicans will be saying otherwise, and in 30 years, they're going to take credit for having ended transphobia. So, it's just, we're going, again, it goes, as Neil deGrasse Tyson said in his debate with Ben Shapiro about this, it's really a question of the individual is the best arbiter as to who they are and what they are. Now, maybe they're going to screw up. There are people who, did have the surgery and wish they never had it. That is going to happen. But the point is, it was their decision and their mistake to make. And so to have an overall policy saying, and they were going to do it for prisoners, blah, 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 and it's just like, well, it's just like any other medical treatment as far as they're concerned. We are people.
It's not like every other medical treatment. It's like if you chose to have a boob job. And should taxpayers fund that? Or if you wanted a nose job because you didn't identify with the nose that you had, should taxpayers be on the hook for that?
It's a little bit different from that, because what we're talking about is
elective. You're calling it.
It's elective.
But we are talking about people who are already in transition, and that's really what they were talking about, is requiring the medications and the rest.
That's not what Kamala was talking about. She was talking about going gung ho. If you come across the border and you're illegal, we'll pay.
So this is where, sorry to interrupt, but this is where I was going to start, with what you just said.
Right.
Is that firstly, you obviously we dove into the deep end on this one.
Right.
And then we ended up just now at it was hyped politically. It was hyped politically because of something.
Because of a survey response that she made 4 years ago.
My understanding from being 50 plus years of life, talking to all the people across all the spectrums, right, is that, when you're 18, you do what you want. So politically, we're not talking about 18 and up. Those people do whatever the heck they want, right?
I'm not so sure about that, but let's just take that as a premise.
Argument.
Yeah.
Right. In our modern lifetime, like that's kind of where it's at. So I have talked to a lot of folks, and one of my relatives who I trust very closely, an uncle, I asked him when I was a child, I was like, "Hey, you're gay. When did you know?" And he's like, basically, when you're in elementary school and you look at the teacher and the teacher smiles at you because you got the question right and you get this feeling and you're like, wow, she really likes me, right? He's like, I got that with a guy teacher instead of a woman teacher. That's the first indication. I got that little weird feeling that I got a positive social response from somebody I looked up to, made me feel good. And then as I got older and older and older, this is what he said. As I got older and older, it was like obvious. But, society, thankfully, at this point, you're allowed to be gay. It's absolutely fine. I think mostly in America, not in yeah, exactly. I think trans is an issue that is very similar in one way, with the exception of not so fine. People aren't comfortable with it.
Yeah, they're not normal gays.
So it's hyped. It's hyped up from the people that are like, I don't quite get that, or I'm not down with that, right? So it's a hot button political issue. The live and let live philosophy of the government is best that governs least breaks down here when you want to control people's behavior. And so it's a way to say, to point to children now on the other side of that line and say, oh, wait, there are people who believe we ought to start having these conversations with people around this time, that they're still under the roof of their parents and they're under 18. And so that's where it starts to get tricky. And then when you say, hey, families and parents and doctors, you can handle this the way you choose, that's one thing. But when the schools now are brought into it, or the government, like you said, like having government funded drugs or procedures or whatever, now people get even more and more hyped about it. So I think it's a political weapon that doesn't take into account the well-being, the best well-being of the person in there involved, their family, their community. Like, we need to mature in how we talk about it. That said, giving people drugs, hormone blocking drugs, from my understanding from health experts, is that it's not it's not terrible to give them drugs, but that's young people because they've been proven safe for a long time. Like, for example, if
That's not true.
So one of the world's foremost experts from Yale, I saw like a 2
Well, we
hour,
don't believe experts.
a 2 hour. But I'm just gonna say they went through the history of using these drugs for decades. For people, like if a girl menstruates early, very, very, very early, they suspend that by giving them drugs at a very early age.
That's not true, unfortunately. These hormone blockers were initially designed to chemically castrate people. That's the foundation of these hormone blockers. The idea that it's a pause button is completely false, and for whatever reason has been a very effective narrative that has taken hold, even for people who are well-educated, PhDs,
right.
Doctors.
So I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that experts have these conflicting opinions.
I get where you're going.
I was just introducing the concept. Yeah. And so that's how people are like, oh, well, maybe it's okay for families and doctors to have that conversation. That's all I was getting at.
Yeah.
No, I understand. My own reason.
But surgery, I don't think very many people think it's a good idea for
12, 13, 14.
Yeah, like I would say it almost never happens, is what, for one thing. And then secondary.
What do you mean? People send their kids to school and they come back women. I mean,
that never happens.
But see, that
never happens. But my point
is,
so few people ever have gotten these surgeries. It's a very, very. It goes back to Neil deGrasse Tyson saying people don't understand probability, right? Or people don't understand the.
But this is where.
So all I'm saying. Sorry to interrupt you. All I'm saying is that the hype, the political, like when you hear Kamala Harris say something that sounds absolutely ridiculous. Because it is absolutely ridiculous, right? Let's be clear. To say, hey, if someone crosses across the border and they're in some immigration prison, let's pay for their gender-affirming surgery. They missed the memo. Like, that is ridiculous, right? But that's not the reason that we're criticizing Kamala Harris for her policy faults. That, I think, is a political weapon that's exploiting people's fears.
And when she answered that survey, what was it, the ACLU or somebody put out? I'm trying to remember, but that's what's was used against her, was that she said that yes, they would be entitled to the treatment, including surgical. When you're in transition, it's not like you do it and then it's done. It's like an ongoing process, and you need certain medications to continue the process and the rest. And if you're incarcerated, you do have, if you're a citizen, you already have a constitutional right to receive that if it's been prescribed by doctors. And all she said was that she would extend the same rights that citizen prisoners have to the immigrants in detention. That's all she was saying. And if those rights were changed, if the AMA decides to come up with different recommendations or the laws are changed, that's fine too. But she basically just said that a immigrant who is caught crossing illegally and detained will not be treated any differently from any other prisoner in the United States of America. That was the point of it. It got twisted into something else very effectively, and partly because she probably didn't even know that she had answered it that way. It's probably answered by staff, and so she probably, she didn't handle it very well because she didn't know what they were talking about.
But all of this, there's two factors here at play, because if Trump had said something like that, it would be the exact same thing. People would use it. And it's not not manipulation. It's you're using what somebody said in a factual setting and saying this is the person that you might vote for.
Yeah.
The other thing is, whenever you're engaged in this kind of conversation, there are the fringe remarks of, oh, it is very rare, it's not happening. Oh, they're trying to trans your kid in school. And those are kind of bulwarks to stop any progress of the discussion, because it does happen frequently. I mean, we're not talking hundreds of thousands of people, but thousands, potentially tens of thousands, especially if you bring in hormone blockers, not necessarily just the surgeries. And again, the idea that it is a pause button is laughably incorrect. It's just not true. I mean, these things have lasting effects, not to mention the fact that if you choose to go down this route, you are on medication for the duration of your life.
And the problem
there are a lot of factors that people don't want to discuss.
I was saying that I was making the point that people say they're safe.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
People do say they're safe.
Yeah.
It's just not true.
But it's, I mean, it's a really complicated medical discussion, because if you are going to transition, it's best that you do it before you're 18.
But
right?
people should know the data. And
I understand that.
And the idea that we're letting kids do this, we don't let kids get tattoos.
But right now,
right? And there are a lot of gay men who think that this is homophobic, this whole practice. Because statistically, traditionally, it's been mostly men who identify as women, and only recently, post social media, and you can draw your own conclusions, that women have started to come on the scene as trans.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Statistically,
I knew trans.
Most of the people would grow out of this. Something as high as 70 to 80% would grow out.
So if
they didn't have any intervention. And just be gay men.
But so that's where you have it. It's a complex discussion.
There's a book.
If you're going to do it, if you are going to transition, it's actually, biologically speaking, best if you do it while you're still growing rather than after.
The most
I know, I agree. I'm just saying that this is a complicated decision that parents have to make with their physicians, and hopefully fully informed, and all of the rest. And that is the decision they have to make. What's happening in the red states now is that parents are being deprived of that decision. It's very interesting when you see a group of people saying the state shouldn't be telling me how I raise my children. If I want to smack my child, I should have the right to do that in discipline. But when it comes to people making decisions about their kids that may even be wrong,
hold on,
they don't want to have that feeling. It's child abuse.
We as a nation have
they're fighting for the right to spank their kids.
But currently, you
it depends on what state you're in. It depends on what state you're in.
Okay.
California, you're not supposed to hit your kid. I think it's legal to spank. I'm not sure, but not hit them in any other way. I mean, and we can debate this. Spanking. My parents,
you can't abuse your kid.
Right. My parents spanked me, and I have to say it was one of the most ineffective things. If I had a choice between a spanking and being grounded for a week, I would take the spanking because it was over in 10 minutes. They weren't going to hit me that hard, right? And it was just it was done, but. People, they're fighting. But the point is that the same people who are saying the state needs to stay out of my decision as to how I discipline my kids are saying, but the state needs to go over and tell those parents what they ought to do with the situation.
But you can't. There are state laws that are across the board, right? Kids can't get tattoos, and nobody's arguing that kids should be able to get tattoos. We've all agreed that they're not mature enough. They don't know enough yet. We've lost the nuance that kids are influenceable.
Their 14-year-old boyfriend and put their name on. Right, I get it. It's just we have made that decision, but I don't know. Should we say that a parent shouldn't allow their kid to have tattoos?
Should we say that a parent shouldn't be able to beat the shit out of their kid?
Well,
it's their child.
Well,
this is all to say. There's a book I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's by Abigail Schreier, called Irreversible Damage, The Transgender Craze Seducing Our Daughters, I believe. It's a phenomenal book. She's a great reporter, great journalist. You should check it out if you have a free time. It's a heavy book, but it's really interesting, a quick read, and there's a lot of nuance packed into it about this issue.
So I think that we could pivot from here.
Well, we just pivoted there.
We never got into the Middle East
because
yet.
culture. Well,
and we haven't even talked about the election.
We got
exactly.
We got plenty of time.
So
right.
cultural. Yeah. I think.
But wait, did we wrap up Ukraine? Is that because we
pivoted from Ukraine?
Yeah.
Every time the trans stuff comes up, I can't not bite on it, and I get
because you're knowledgeable and opinionated.
I'm just very
informed,
fascinated with the issue because I have a surface level understanding, but I'm just intrigued by things that are like that I don't know.
I think we can build on what we've talked about so far to say that there is this cultural identity aspect of the election outcome, and that it gets. I was using almost of referring to it as weaponization of people's, it's not fear, but just like almost lack of
understanding.
Well, mostly that, but basically there are lots of different opinions out there, and culturally speaking, like a lot of folks feel, hey, that side doesn't get it, or that side's just not meeting me at the place. They're tripping. They've crossed my tripwire of what is acceptable from a political leader, basically, or someone who's going to organize our community, someone who's going to be the person that tells us what to do and we have to follow. And I think I mentioned that I thought COVID was one of those immensely important tripwires where people sensed their community was being harmed by somebody who they couldn't impact the rule set that was imposed on them. And I think just to finish up what we were saying about the idea of transgender issues. It's one of those things where people don't have a lot of, no one needed to know much about it because it affected so few people. But that became, it's like here's my point. Part of the, you and I don't like to use this term. We've realized we don't like to use this term, but it's just prevalent in community now. That anti-woke backlash, right? So those cultural issues where like academic constructs and academic philosophies have infiltrated sort of cultural, coastal, left-leaning blue states and worked their way from the academia down into like our everyday life.
Right.
And there's just this resistance to say like, wait, CRT, critical race theory, that understanding of how America's history is structured, I'm going to push back. Like that people are saying, like, I'm pushing back here. And then you've got people like Governor DeSantis and the policies that they put in place in Florida, where I would argue, in an opportunistic way, have tapped into people's, this will not pass. Like we don't want these books in our school. We want to ban books. For the most part, people don't want books banned, right? But somehow they get caught up in this fury of cultural hype about like, we have to push back against the left. We have to push back against the Democrats because these are the things that they're taking out of the ivory tower and putting them into my kid's school. Like, so when you compound the cultural, like we talked about with the mask mandates and vaccine mandates and closing businesses and closing schools and those experts that started to come out and say, actually, education's being really harmed right now. We better do something different. That guy, I forgot his name, from Stanford. I don't want to butcher his name, so I'm not going to say it. But if you look it up, the guy who's probably going to be the next director of the National Institutes of Health, he was one of those people. He got 1,000 people to sign the letter that said, we need to reopen these schools. It's going to have lasting harm, and it's going to affect, this whole thing is going to start to affect poor people the worst, and children, more generally speaking, terribly. Trump's like, that guy came out and he, and I think Robert Kennedy also wants this guy to be our next director of National Institutes of Health, not because he's got any experience at all running health systems. He's actually a scholar from Stanford. That's his claim to fame here, is that he was a disruptor.
But I think I'm getting lost in this term of disrupting because some of those are important things to push back on. Like just because there is social cachet, you could say, in pushing back on the woke ideology in these instances doesn't mean that there isn't profound baseline reasoning to do so, right? Pushing back on lockdowns was kind of pushing back on the woke ideology, and there was substantial data to support the idea that lockdowns were complete bullshit. But the woke ideology was that this is what we have to do. You have to protect grandma. You have to do this.
So
or with the book bannings in school. I mean, most people don't understand that.
I'm actually
Understand
convinced
what
that,
the books actually are that their kids are looking.
I mean, I don't want to debate the lockdown stuff because I believe it actually saved my mother's life, but as well as, by the way, the vaccine. And I credit Trump with warp speed. I think that was one of his actual really good policies. He doesn't want to take credit for it anymore, but I don't want to get into the details of that because that's a very complicated discussion. I don't think it had to go as far as it did, and I think that we could have made exceptions. It was stupid that they were saying, "Oh, you can't be out on the bay sailing." That's stupid, right? Okay, so
can't go to the park.
You're right. You can't go to the park
beach.
when in fact the virus at the time and probably still doesn't survive in outdoor air long sun.
Not to mention the fact that
kills
vitamin D is incredibly important in fighting it off.
Right. So there's a lot to talk about there, but I want to go to the term woke.
If you don't mind, really quick, I'm sorry, we'll pivot to woke.
This is one of the challenges of doing three is just the ideas are lightning fast.
But I think this is important for posterity's sake, if nothing else. And I'll be as brief as I can. The concept of lockdown was my understanding, and then kind of the prism with which I view this is some set of folks determined this was essential to prevent the health sector from collapse, the whole hospital system.
Right.
You saw what was happening in northern Italy. In the earliest stages, we had overwhelmed, the hospitals were overwhelmed. It was like zombie apocalypse.
We'll never know if it saved lives.
Yeah.
Many lives.
So it became a public health expert decision, whatever that means, that we are proceeding as if this is the way. This is the way. And I just for people what does that mean? I just for illustration purposes, the fear of a nuclear war in the 1950s, the public health response. One of my friends got her master's in public health on this, so I got to read through her thesis, right? Everybody knew it was absolute 100% bullshit that if you go, we're like,
you can say we're not. This is not FCC regulated.
Sorry.
Yeah,
just like Adolf Reed.
You go under your desk and you put your hands over your head and you go duck and cover, and all the kids are doing their duck and cover drills. And you go home and you tell your parents, "Oh, if there's a nuclear war, mom, dad, duck and cover." And it calmed. It was a public health decision to calm the entire country.
They would all be dead if a bomb.
I don't think that calmed anybody.
Well, it did, but
it was a national security decision. It was a we do not want chaos in America.
No, in fact, my mother. If you go back,
I want to touch on that.
If you go back to the 1980s, you will find a headline in the Pacifica Tribune. Ethel Kirk raises ruckus over FEMA nuclear war curriculum. Reagan wanted to renew that because it does provide an illusion of, that you can survive a nuclear war, which if a bomb goes off...
It was a policy of illusion intentionally.
Yeah, and that fundamentally erodes any trust the public has. It's the same thing with the mask.
Oh, yeah,
I want to touch on this.
It was exactly the same thing with the mask.
And that's the problem is when you have...
On purpose.
But,
100%. If you look at the notes,
on purpose,
a virus
they
goes
knew
right through a cloth mask as if nothing was there.
But you can't do that.
Everybody gets an N95 or nothing. We didn't have N95s.
N95s don't work either.
They do.
N95s don't work. They know, but this is the thing. You can't lie to the public and then have it come out, especially in the information age that we're in. You can't do these things, even if you think you're doing it for the greater good to calm people.
They did it.
I agree.
That's exactly why Trump won. And that's why we are where we are.
The classic example was the fire that was outside Healdsburg a few years back. It was up in the hills, and the media kept getting people on. We were all told we needed to evacuate the area of Santa Rosa. I was with my parents, and we didn't evacuate because we didn't believe them, because we don't believe them very often. And We were right. And every time, and it said, yes, the fire is getting closer to Healdsburg. And every time a reporter said, well, how close is the fire to Healdsburg? They wouldn't get a straight answer. It never got anywhere near Healdsburg. But they wanted to say that because they wanted to make sure that there weren't as many people that they would have to evacuate if it did get that close, right? So, and I agree. If you're being vague or you're not telling the truth, then they're not going to believe you next time. We knew it because I lived with I was with my aunt, uncle, my father, and my mother, and we all know that the government lies. And so, yeah, we weren't going to leave the place. There's no way it's going to get through Santa Rosa this far. There's no way they'll allow that to happen. But a lot of people did, and they all left, left the senior living place where my parents were. I will point out that most of the people who left are Trump supporters, but I don't want to get to that. It's just but yes, if the government does lie, but the government is in a position of thinking about the short term and the long term, and sometimes they sacrifice the long term for the short term.
That was the one point
I'm not agreeing, saying it was a good policy, but again, what people forget is this was the policy under Trump. I mean,
I hold Trump accountable for that as well. But you can't do that because now you have no credibility. You cannot lie.
I don't know if it saves a million lives here and you're at risk of losing 5 million lives later. That's a tough decision.
Masks did not save any lives.
Hold on.
That's proven. The Cochrane Review did a study, including N95s, that found no benefit.
That's one study.
No benefit.
It's one study.
A very prestigious study that has been held to high esteem for decades.
Asians have been using masks for decades, and they do have lower spread rate.
But they're also cleaner. They wash their hands more. There are a number of confounding
certain people's practices. But
I'm thinking of Japan specifically.
Right.
Yes,
Japan.
But there are confounding principles in that.
No.
And you can't lie to the public. If the government is lying, and the government is presumably made of experts, as it quote unquote has been historically, that means the experts are the ones lying, which then leads to where we are now.
There are conflicting studies about
are questioning the experts.
There are conflicting studies.
I don't know anybody that is arguing for the efficacy of masks.
I'll forward them to you because there are different studies that indicate it, because this particular virus traveled in.
Do you know how small the virus actually is?
Yes, but it traveled in saliva. It traveled even in the air. It was not an airborne. It was not an airborne virus, unlike some other viruses. It traveled in saliva, and saliva does get blocked by the mask. So there's conflicting studies about that. But I don't want to get bogged down on that because I'll send you the links to that. And I don't take a position. I'm not an expert. But I'm just saying that there are conflicting studies in that. This was not a truly airborne virus.
So you are aware that Fauci himself has come out and said that masks
exactly.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know any credible current study that has shown any efficacy.
I'll send them to you.
I want to key on the lie part, right? So to say that a comprehensive strategy to save the hospitals from breaking down, that doesn't mean we think that it's going to help an individual person.
But you could say that. You could say this is what we need to do to save the hospital.
Exactly.
So they are lying.
Yeah, no, if you're telling the truth about it, maybe that will have an effect.
If you're saying you get the vaccine, you can't catch it and you can't spread it. And during the vaccine trials, they never tested for transmission. Right. You are legitimately lying.
So trust me, I'm playing devil's advocate here.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to pivot slightly, and again, I can't believe we're talking about this, but pivot.
It feels like we're back in the COVID.
Conspiracy.
I want to get back to wokeness when we have a chance.
Yeah, we're going to go to wokeness, but I think this is important. The origin, because you named Fauci and you named lie. The origin of the virus. It's an example, the Wuhan lab leak theory versus the organic animal into society theory. This is a classic case. That Wade article just points out, like, again, I'm cognizant of the fact that people disagree, but is it an outright lie what they did to say that they're not sure where it came from? I think projecting like it's a strategy of cover up, a conspiracy of lying. I think putting that label on it is not necessary.
Are you aware of Fauci's emails and correspondence?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Absolutely.
And you still wouldn't consider that lying?
Well, all I'm saying is that from the perspective of we just had an election and we've got people in there that are saying it's time for a change because maybe Mr. Smith needs to go to Washington. Maybe we need some citizens in there who aren't going to go along to get along when, like I said, if we're going to protect hospitals, we're going to do these 6 things. We're going to go along to get along. We don't want to blame some funded projects that we funded in Wuhan lab. We're going to go along to get along. I think that's the enemy that the people have defeated already, which is why I think that this anti-wokeism thing is part and parcel of what to expect next. I said on our show that this election is probably going to be something like a 9/11, something like a January 6th, because of the long-term impact of what it means. To give you some credit, people don't want to be lied to, and this idea that we have to trust the system, the establishment, the experts is now, I think, vanquished. And so what comes next is going to take some time. And I think we should pivot to wokeism.
All right,
going into wokeism, this will be a good tie-in. It's not just the lie, which I have a personal huge problem with. It's the suppression of the truth, which then takes it to a whole nother level.
Censorship.
And I'm biased because I was talking about this in various instances, and I had videos pulled and I was suppressed. I'm not obviously
Elon's
a doctor
importance,
who should be
right?
Yeah.
The Twitter
but
files.
That takes it to a new level because you're not just withholding, in my opinion, lying about the truth. You're suppressing people who are trying to tell the truth.
In the name of national security, public health.
But anything can fall under that umbrella. WMDs, we have to fight Putin to the end, could fall under that umbrella.
Right.
Lying about biolab in Ukraine.
Trump won.
Real quickly, it goes back to London.
I'm not full sail on that, but I'm hopeful.
It goes back to the London bombings, right? Everybody was supposed to turn their lights off, and people who didn't turn their lights off came under a lot of flack saying, you're going to give the Germans a target for bombing. And in some cases, that was true. In other cases, it wasn't. If you were on the outskirts of Britain, you probably could have had your lights on, and that wasn't a problem. But you did get in trouble with your neighbors if you had your lights on at night. And people were killed because people in the city had their lights on at night, but there was no way they could say, oh, well, these people can have their lights on and they can't. And so there was lying, and did it save lives? I don't know. Probably saved a few. But maybe did it cause more a loss of life when people realize, oh, they're not going to bomb my house because I have my lights on. It's just one light. They'd be stupid to bomb a house because seeing one light. If they see a bunch of lights, it's different. But I can have mine on because nobody else has theirs on. I mean, it's a really tricky thing about the individual rights versus that. But there was a lot of lying going on. Did it save lives? Did it cost lives? Did it do both? I don't know. But that's, so it goes back because a lot of comparisons were made about people who just insisted on keeping their lights on during the war when there were London bombings going on and not. And, people can decide as to when they were doing. I think by the time the V2 rockets were doing, it really didn't matter because rockets weren't paying attention to lights. But before that, it was a kind of issue. But I want to get to wokeness, because this all does tie into an interest, because I do think that one of the biggest factors in Trump winning, both in 2024 and 2016, and I actually consider 2020 to be an anomaly. I actually think that with all of the sociological factors, Trump should have won that election, but Biden was unique in a way that other Democratic candidates aren't. He has a history of labor contacts, people trust him, and the rest. And yeah, he was a man as opposed to Harris being a black woman. I do think those were factors, but I don't think they were the deciding factor. I want to talk about wokeness, and the reason that Dave and I don't like to use the term wokeness.
Is this a newfound decision not to use wokeness?
No, it's not. It's something I've had a problem with because I had the same rule with political correctness. Political correctness was a term that began in the American left as a term of irony. During the Cultural Revolution with the Gang of Four, it wasn't. You were politically incorrect, and being politically incorrect could get a dunce cap put on you and get you executed, right? It was an actual term in earnest. What happened is in America is that you had different factions of the anti-war movement, some more radical than others. You had the Weatherman version, the takeover of the SDS, Students for a Democratic Society, by left-wingers, which when it had begun by people who were involved in what's called the Port Huron Statement, which was a statement that was left-wing but was wrapped in values of Americanism, as left-wing being the fulfillment of Americanism. By the time you got to 1968 and the convention and the Weathermen and forgetting the
Democratic Convention in Chicago.
Right, Democratic Convention in Chicago, but I'm forgetting the name of the woman who was in charge of SDS by then. The radicals had pretty much pushed the idealist aside. And so, or had almost done that, but there were still fights within Students of her Democratic Society, prompting Father Daniel Berrigan saying, boy, this is reinforcing my belief in original sin, when he attended some of the meetings. God, why am I forgetting her name? She came up. She actually comes to Humboldt County every once in a while. She's the husband of the guy they tried to tag. Obama
about Angela Davis?
No, I'm talking about the woman who was, she was white, she was elected the head of DSA, and she and her husband were part of the group that Obama was part of, that both Hillary Clinton, and anyway, she was the head of it, and when she got elected, it was pretty much the takeover of the radicals, or what some of the Port Huron people said were the quarterbacks and cheerleaders taking over the movement, whereas before it was a movement of nerds. I'm not going to get all into that, but basically, there was a point when somebody at one of the SDS meetings was saying, well, I guess I'm not politically correct, so you're going to have me executed like your buddy Mao would have, or something like that. I can't remember the exact quote. And so politically correct became a term of irony in the left that was used almost self-deprecating. I guess I'm being politically correct. I'm not politically correct. Fast forward to the late 70s, early 80s, when the media and the right wing caught up with it, they thought it was a term in earnest. They thought that politically correct was an actual concept, and that there were leftists out there who wanted you to be politically correct and not be politically incorrect. Bill Maher bought into it. His first show was called that, right? It was a complete bullshit thing because it had never been used in the United States as a actual term in earnest. It was always a term of irony, and then it ceased to become a term of irony when it got taken over and appropriated by the right, which is why I never used the term, even though I knew what they were talking about, because it played right into that. Nobody ever said in America that I know of, or if so, very few, you're politically incorrect, therefore you're evil. It was always a joke, until it wasn't a joke, when all of a sudden the media and the right wing decided that was proof that the American left was authoritarian. All right? So woke has replaced politically correct, right? You don't hear politically correct so much anymore. Woke was just a slang term in African-American activism to describe people who were awake. In other words, politically aware of what was going on around them. And somehow that got converted into ideological attempt to control what I say, and
thought police,
and
1984
the whole
reference.
and the rest,
reference.
and so it gets used. So I don't use it because right now it's like a term that the left doesn't even use anymore, not even in African American circles, or and it just like, social justice warrior and a bunch of other terms like that. So I hesitate to use it, but we don't really have a word that encapsulates it, because when I say identity politics, it is something that I think is a problem. I don't totally agree that it's overall the problem or that identity politics should be completely rejected as a concept, but I do think it's a problem. But it doesn't incorporate all of wokeism. Obviously, it talks about a lot of different things. Whatever it is, the prevailing left decides is the issue and that is not subject to debate or discussion, right? So I hesitate to use the term, but there is a reference to what is called the anti-woke left. And I've been emailing them to Dave over the past couple of weeks because I want to talk about him, because I do think people like Adolf Reed is a Marxist who believes that the primary problem in the country is class. He is African American. His son Touré is African American, and they believe that wokeism and identity politics and racial politics ideologies they completely reject as not even worth the paper it's printed on. Anything written by Ibram Kendi or D'Angelo, who wrote White Fragility. They think white fragility everybody should just use it as toilet paper. They're literal about it. They say this. I mean, and so and the reason being is
or white privilege.
Right. Or white privilege or white fragility in particular is a concept.
Or that slavery is America's original sin, or that racism is America's original sin. They're saying
everything
they don't believe. They actually say there is no structural racism in this country. There is no systemic racism. There is racism, and it's a problem, but the systemic problem is class. They'll tell you that, yes, Black people are more disproportionately killed by cops because they are disproportionately in the class, right? And so they and one of the examples they'll give is they'll say, well, okay, let's say the person who is proposing the race and as African Americans, they get to say this, more than white, although I'm coming across a lot more white people saying it too, and I've sent those to him, is that you have an example of, okay, Black people are disproportionately not covered by, don't have health coverage, right? All right. And so the liberal solution to this is to create an affirmative action program so that there are equally as many people, or at least proportionately, the people who are Black as not being covered as white not being covered. But you still have people who are not being covered,
like a Band-Aid, like the affirmative, Affordable Care Act.
Right. And so they're going to tell you that that what the so-called the D'Angelo, Ibram Kendi left is actually a reactionary concept and ideology, because it is not attacking the real structural problems in this situation. Because you've got, you have the disproportionality of Black people being not covered by insurance. But if you have the socialist solution, universal coverage, then you've dealt with both the disproportionality of inequality and inequality, right? So why are you so focused on the stupid disproportionality of it? And so that's the point they try to make, is that if you look at the people who were killed by police, shot by police, if you looked at class, you'd probably find almost nobody, Black, white, or any other person who is shot by police are from the upper classes. Very rare, few. Yes, it's disproportionately Black because Black people are disproportionately working class because of some of the history and the rest. But you really need to solve the problem of inequality in this country, and police people ought to be not shooting anybody when they're not armed. And you get the point here. So they are making the case that the left is the problem. It's not just the Democratic Party, but that this idea that D'Angelo has, you're familiar with White Fragility in the D'Angelo book, right? Is that if you come to my workshops...
Loosely, I haven't read the book.
Yeah, right. If you buy my book and you come to my workshops and you're never going to be able to solve the problem because you're white, you were born white, and it's kind of like the Christian concept of original sin. You're never going to not be sinful. But maybe you could watch it for a while, and meanwhile in HR, human resources, we'll take care of the imbalance, but you just need to not be a problem for your people of color, and I can provide you the way to lessen the problem, but you're still going to be a problem because you're white, right? And it's just, they see that as a reactionary concept because it doesn't address the real problems, right? And
yeah. So I could like expound on that in a couple things to kind of bring you along, because we got a crash course on this in the last couple of weeks since the election, because there's so many people, just to like reorient, so many people who are saying, hey, was it, Kamala Harris's strategy or tactics? Was it, the economic issues that were unaddressed? Was it the cultural issues that were unaddressed? Like where's the fault line? What was the problem with how Donald Trump was able to get a, 1.5% win over the popular vote? So he didn't just win the electoral college, which if you looked at the grid ahead of time, hey, Kamala would have had to have won by 3 points nationally in order to have a better chance of winning than losing. So it wasn't just, hey, you get the popular vote. If you win, you win. If you lose, you lose. It was that she needed, like, the odds were, well, not just 1%, not just 2%. She needs a full 3% to even have a good chance of winning. She didn't get that. She got 1.5. She lost, right? So why? To Eric's point, when it came to, say, health insurance disparity, if you look at, there's, I think, 38 Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, advanced economies in the world. Who doesn't have universal coverage? Us. Who does? Everyone else, right? So if you look at that and you say, well, why are Black people disproportionately underinsured? Is it because of structural racism? Is it because of racism? No. It's because our country doesn't have a policy that every other country has, because they figured this out already, right? So that's to give Eric that one example.
Eric's adding some theme music for you.
No, I'm trying to find something.
The other thing that he said, which I think sort of helps clarify here a little bit, is that from the perspective of the speakers that he talked about, Adolph Reed and his son Tory Reed, their position is not only like, yes, there is racism. There has been racism. These are really, it's a virtue to speak to it, to address it, to try to educate people, bring people along. But people are going to be bigots. Some people are going to be bigots. This is the way of the world. Some people are going to maintain, for whatever reason, some ignorant worldview, or maybe it's informed and they're fairly confident that being racist is okay for them. That's fine for them, right? The idea is that you still have to talk to these people to get them along, to persuade them to try to address the issue of why don't we have universal healthcare coverage for everybody, and that's like the basic example given, and so they use this. He mentioned that Eric mentioned that they were that at least Adolph Reed is a known Marxist. I didn't even catch up on that. I just figured he was a left-leaning Black dude who was on the faculty.
But he denies being a class reductionist, which is what he's accused of.
Yeah.
He absolutely denies that. But anyway.
Yeah. So but he's a lecturer, I think, at Yale, or was a lecturer at UPenn. So the guy's established and credible. His son's also established and credible. Wrote a good book. I only read the executive summary, but I listened to him speak a little bit. And so anyway, I think what it adds value here is that two things that Tory brings up. One is the objective realities of racism on the ground. That's one thing. Like we can acknowledge it, but what solutions does that propose? Right? Like when you're looking to solve any given problem, knowing the history, and we could talk, I think the history is also important, but knowing the history of America, how race played an important part in the political alliances and the actual decisions of real leaders in, like, say, South Carolina or North Carolina, over from 1619 all the way through to 1820s and 1830s, and then all the way through to 1890s and 1920s. Like, you could look at any given piece and learn a ton. But the point is, these are political, economic alliances formed around self-interest. It's not racism necessarily. Racism isn't the thing that drove it all. Racism is what allows us to alienate people, to sort of, for lack of a better way to say it, abandon true Christian values in the name of Christian values, right? There's contradictions and absurdities in our history. That's different than saying that racism is the most important thing we need to look at right now when we fix policy problems that we're dealing with. So I think that that's a really important piece of this that he brings to the table. So not only it breaks our solidarity as people who are trying to solve problems, it prevents us from maybe having alliances and deliberations with people that we need to have conversations with. Yeah. So that's one thing. But the other thing is morality. It projects morality into the actual not to use a fancy word, but the prognosis, right? Like to say like, this is how we see the world, therefore we are morally superior, and you are, Hillary Clinton's famous phrase, deplorables. But by projecting the morality of deplorable onto people that just disagree with you, it's counterproductive. That's not how you persuade people to say, you know what, being a bigot is a really stupid way to run my life. Or not even so stupid, not to be so dismissive, but, I know people that were racist at some point in their life, and then they figured it out. Like, I don't know, maybe Tom Sawyer is a good example again. Like Tom Sawyer was raised like, oh, that guy's that, right? But then he met the person, and then he had the raft trip, and then he's like, this is my friend.
Huckleberry Finn.
I keep messing that up. Sorry. But I not to make light of it, but like that's the thing. If it's a and I spoke to a lot of Republicans after the election, four different states, and before, and so one of my friends gave the explanation of when we are talked down to as Republicans, and when we are dismissed, not even necessarily Republicans, someone who was raised conservative,
even people who are just union members that are probably naturally part of the old Democratic or the old left coalition that are told that they can't be a part of it because they have not moved forward enough in terms of their...
In other words, it's divisive to a fault.
Right.
What was the name of that author and his son?
Adolph Reed, and his son is Teray Reed. And you'll find all kinds of videos on him, particularly on Jacobin on YouTube, and well worth listening to. He's kind of slow. He's better in writing than he is in verbally. But another author to pay attention to is she wrote a book called Dirtbag, which is about what's called the dirtbag left, which is left people that are basically rude and on the rest. And her name, that's what I was looking up, Amber Frost. And her book Betrayed is a series of essays that is right. But she points out that, somebody asked her, well, what if Pepe wants to join my union? You understand who Pepe is, right?
Pepe the Frog.
Yeah, Pepe the MAGA person, blah blah.
Co-opted as that.
Yeah, so he said, so she was asked, what if Pepe wants to join my union? And her response is, then you've won. If you could bring those people into your union, into your fold, those are people who voted for Biden, by the way. People who didn't do it. Then you've got it, because you're not going to solve every social problem. And in fact, you have less of a chance of solving them if you've cast them out. You could bring them into the coalition to make them part of the coalition. As I think I pointed out in the last show, West Virginia was actually solidly Democratic, only didn't vote Republican in 1984 when 49 states went to Reagan, and 1972 when 49 states went to Nixon. But West Virginia was a solid blue state because the coal miners' unions were some of the most radical, not as radical possibly as the longshoremen, but they were the only union willing to strike during World War II. They said, I don't give a fuck that this might undermine the war effort. We still have our rights, and we're still going to fight for them. And so therefore, you do this. The coal miners' union, I mean, there's that whole movie. Have you ever seen Matewan, the John Sayles movie?
No.
Worth seeing. Where the coal miners' union, the companies are using black and Italians to break the strike. It didn't happen in that particular strike, but it happened in others. The longshoremen's strike of 1934 and the Ford strike of 1941. And instead of and what the bosses, I'll call them, because that's class reductionist Marxist terminology, and because I can't think of anything better right now, because I'm a little drunk. But but Chris Cooper, actor, plays the part of the union organizer in Matewan, and says, if to the white coal miners, if you don't let the black and Italians into your union, then you're not a union. You're just a goddamn club, right? Well, this, of course, happened in 1934. There was the Longshoremen's Union, which was a strike, general strike that went up and down the coast, and it got violent. People were killed in it, and there's a whole history of that in San Francisco. And Harry Bridges was an Australian. I think I've even talked about him on this show, but who was the leader of the union at that time, and basically said part of the demands that they're making is we want the union to be in charge of the hiring hall. And so when the employers, the bosses, wanted to bring in black people from Oakland to break the strike, they had one of their members, C.J. Dellums, the uncle of Ron Dellums, who was a congressman of Berkeley for a long time, probably the most left-wing congressman until he retired sometime in the mid-90s. And he got up onto the stage at the church where they were trying to rally people to break the strike. And he says, okay, if this fool is done speaking, fool being somebody who's speaking for the bosses, is speaking, I want to talk to you about what you can actually gain from this. And basically, instead of breaking the strike, all of those black people joined the strike. They joined and marched in it. And the white people in that union were willing to set aside their racism for the moment and say, okay, yeah, we're all in this together. And when we have the hiring hall, we'll make sure that everybody gets to have some work. We'll distribute it. We will decide who goes out on the jobs. And sure enough, they did that. And to this day, it's one of the most integrated and radical unions. And later, the longshoremen actually organized to strike. There were Chinese women who were in the fabric textile industries, and they couldn't really strike on their own. There was all kinds of racism against them. They were being exploited in deadly ways. And the longshoremen actually went outside and they basically told some of the women, the leaders of the women, hey, you don't have to strike. We'll strike for you. We will picket your halls. And they became an interracial union, the first interracial union. I mean, before that, the Chinese Exclusion Act was backed by labor they were racist, but not because they were racist. It was because they didn't want more labor coming in to undermine the value of, the more workers you have, the less effective a union is, and the lower the wages, because the lower the value, supply and demand, right? So they had this down, and then a similar thing happened in a strike against Ford. I'm sure Ford, if there was a concept back then, they probably would have put Black Lives Matter signs all over town, because there were a group of black people being recruited to break that strike. Well, the union got in talking to the church leaders, the black church leaders, and the civil rights leaders, and they again said, you can all be part of the union and we'll work out a situation so that you're not excluded by seniority. And there's that. This was the CIO. The CIO at the time was an alternative to the AFL, the Congress of Industrial Organization, I think it was, and of Industrial Organizations, pardon me, as an alternative to the American Federation of Labor, which had become kind of stodgy and almost conservative. So these were moments where they were able to bring this. Now, were the people, the white longshoremen and the white auto workers, not racist after that? No, but they actually were able to think, you know what? It's not in my interest to act on my racism right now. So, so instead of these workshops where people go and say, you're a horrible person because you're racist and the rest, the appeal that should be made is that racism is being used against you to divide you from people who are your natural allies. And the Democrats nor the left have been really effective on this. It's one of the downsides of the New Left, I think. The New Left was a little bit more upper class, student-based, and the rest, and abandoned a little bit of of what the old left had. My grandfather, in a political argument with my father, my grandfather being typically old left, he'd been in the Communist Party, and my father being typically new left, who kind of joined the new left as the anti-war movement, But they even didn't, it's complicated. My uncle and my dad were a little bit older than everybody else, and they were working a construction job on the UC campus, and they attended a Vietnam Day meeting, and people didn't trust them. They're hard hats, right? Hard hats are reactionaries and the rest. They had to kind of prove themselves. They started their own movement. So they were sort of hybrid, old left, new left. My grandfather, though, in an argument before he died, told my father ecology is a bourgeois science, right? Mm-hmm. The old Communist Party did not believe that ecology was a cause they should adapt. This was pre, Love Canal and a lot of other major things when environmental concerns became almost crisis level. But he thought it was a what do you call it, quality of life concept. And the old left was not really happy that the new left was adopting environmental causes. So you've got this, but at a certain point, you have to tell workers, you know what, you got to live on this planet too, right? So how do you integrate these policies? And the left has lost its way and completely lost what we call the white working class. And we shouldn't even be talking about the white working class, right? If you're a Marxist, and I consider myself a cultural Marxist, I'm not really I'm not into reductionism in any kind. I think that life is way too complicated to basically embrace any single ideology. But definitely, these people who are voting for Trump now are people who used to vote for Democrats, who used to vote along the side of leftists. And so this is what people like Amber Frost, Adolph Reed, William Ben Michaels, and other people who I suggest you look up their videos on that are trying to tell the left and the Democrats, you need to reclaim this. Now, Bernie's been saying that too, by the way. Bernie
read my mind, actually.
Bernie got a lot of white votes. In fact, he defeated Clinton in almost all of the states in the primaries where white votes were the majority, where white working class votes were the majority. Later, he would win in California because of really good organizing, but it's at any rate, so Bernie represents that. He is a class reductionist by some of the identity politics orientation, but we really the left needs to get over its concept that you can't be a part of our movement until you have freed yourself from all of this. But if you really believe in your own ideology, left-wingers, that we can't free ourselves until we've actually made structural change in the society, then these people are your allies. You're not going to change them until later. Yes, there are a lot of Black and Latino men who voted against Harris simply because they can't vote against a woman, but there are plenty of white men.
But that's all speculative?
No. There are people there are Black and Latinos who actually said it, probably about 10 to 15% of Black men, not all of them, but enough that made a difference.
Where are you getting those statistics? Obviously, yes, it does happen, but there are women that voted
from the
exit
polls, and yes, there are women who will also not vote for a woman. There are probably about 15 to 20% of American people who will not vote for a woman because of sexism. But the whole point is that you don't make any points with them if you exclude them from your coalition because of that. You bring them into the coalition, you fight together on what you agree with, and then you have the conversations that you can't have if they're in a different camp. And for a long time, with the term deplorables and the looking down, we have the diploma gap that David Brooks talked about, and by the way, Bernie as well. You got to bring them in before you can change their minds.
2 out of 3 people don't have a college degree.
Right.
I don't see that happening for the left. That's what's been fascinating about watching.
Well, that's why this is a movement. This is a movement within the left. Will it take root, or will it or will they just be rejected as class reductionists? Adolph Reed having internalized racism, and self-hatred, and the rest. Adolph and his son are particularly effective, I think, in it because they are African American. But they were Adolph Reed had an event that was going to be sponsored by Democratic Socialists of America, and he was canceled because they said he was a class reductionist. However, pay attention to AOC, Ocasio-Cortez's tweets of late, and her social media context, because she is asking people. She encountered, there were thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even in her district, who voted for her and Trump. Now, how does somebody do that? Ideologically, that makes no sense, right? They're on the opposite ends of the world. She put out a message and said, I want to know, I want to learn from you. Tell me why you voted this way. And there were a lot of people who said, hey, I'm just voting for Trump because I want to set a dumpster fire because, blah, blah, blah.
Flip the table.
Yeah, right. And
disruptors.
But there were other people too who, and she talked apparently to trans people in her own district who said, I don't care about pronouns. I care about my rights and not being, having to be afraid I'm going to get beaten when I walk out onto the street, right? She removed her, actually it was even before the election.
Took out the pronouns.
She took the pronouns off of her social media. So I see that as maybe there is some movement. Is it big?
I think it's too ingrained in the party. I mean, you look at their self-reflection now. And
but what about the left?
The left as a party. I think the left has conquered
Democrats
the
are not a party of the left. They're a party of centrist establishment, corporate interests.
Yes, and Adolf Reed will tell you that identity politics and neoliberalism go hand in hand.
But the extreme left has essentially ingrained itself into the left.
It depends
as a party.
It depends on what you mean by the extreme left. Adolf Reed would say these people are reactionaries.
They're told there's nowhere else to go by the party.
Right.
And that's true. There is nowhere further left than the center to go.
Well,
you think, they're not in the center. They're not even left of center. They're extreme left now.
Yeah.
The Democrat Party as a whole.
Well, the big question is,
you don't believe that.
How are the Green Party people voting? Or the Green Party voters? Are they?
Wait, I want to touch on that.
All right.
You don't think that? Where do you think the party is as a whole?
I think it's centrist.
The Democrats.
Yes.
In
the wrong ways.
So I mean, just to take a step back,
'cause he's less drunk than I am, so I'll let him.
So just for context, Eric and I are both delegates to the California Democratic Party representing our assembly district. So we're citizens in this community who go to conventions representing the community so that we have a seat at the table to vote on various things that the party makes.
We're in the Bernie faction, by the way. So we're different from a lot of the others.
Yeah. So we do actually have the leader, the current chair of the Democratic Party, is a member of our community. He moved up here.
Yeah.
And so that's
He's
somebody
a centrist.
So in effect, there's a pragmatism model within the Democratic Party. So they in part. They realized during Bill Clinton, this era, this what was it called? The DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council or something. They got together and they was like, hey, what's the best way for us to build a winning coalition? And so they co-opted various facets of industry and just various special interest groups. And they that was successful for Bill Clinton. It's called the third way, right? So that's how Tony Blair got elected as the Prime Minister of England at that time.
Right.
Triangulation, it's called. You take a little bit from the right, a little bit from the left, you get enough to win a winning coalition. And that strategy basically has been carried through by, to a certain extent, lip service to people who are pretty far to the left, who in a parliamentary system would be in a different party. But I'm oversimplifying. But if you fast forward to this current election, what I'm trying to think of the name of that organization that I referenced like 3 times recently, on various shows. But Kamala Harris was able to get about $700 million funneled to her from a super PAC that spent on advertising in the battleground states and targeting specific. It's almost like Moneyball. You've seen the movie Moneyball. So baseball, you recruit the guys based on the stats. New York Times did an article about it. And so what they were able to do is say, these are the things people want to hear in these exact suburban areas around these exact urban cores. And you hit the right markets with the right policies, the right messaging, comms, you'll get just enough people to win, just enough states to win. So to me, that's like emblematic of saying, well, we're going to represent the interest of the donor, to oversimplify, the donor class, people that kind of run all the things. Like for example, in California, when we tried to, as a state, propose, it's in the legislature that there's going to be potentially a single-payer healthcare system. The Alliance Against Single-Payer Healthcare, even though the Democratic Party has it in their platform, and even though it's something that they say, Kamala Harris said she supports it, and many, many people, not to vilify individuals, but many people have said they support it. But when the rubber hits the road, they're more interested in the special interests like hospitals, like insurance companies, like drug companies, like health equipment manufacturing companies. And that coalition of donors has a little bit louder voice. So when the reason I became a delegate in the first place, actually, was because back during the Bernie days, one of my colleagues said, hey, pay attention to this inter-party dynamic because it's about 50-50. With Bernie running, it's energizing this base, and it's possible that the Bernie faction could take over the California Democratic Party and by extension have a bigger voice in the Democratic National Party. But it was a loss of, I think, 60 votes, which means if 31 more delegates out of about 3,000 voted for one particular chair of the party instead of a different chair, then the party could have taken a turn towards the left. But if you remember, Bernie was run out of town. Like the party circled the wagons and said, James Carville famously was like, you can't have Bernie be the lead. That's the end of the Democratic Party.
And now he regrets that, by the way. James Carville has said, you know what? Bernie was right. We should have just run him. Maybe he would have lost. Maybe he would have won. But he had a better chance of winning.
So it's from an inside baseball perspective that I would say maybe no matter how you cut the percentages, Democratic Party is a little bit more interested in, say, fossil fuel money jobs than they are interested in green energy investments at the expense of fossil fuel industry priorities, for example. And it's just, I just think that that's a dynamic it's a tension. They could just as easily be mutually supportive, but there's a tension. So there's inside baseball fighting. You could say something similar, and I hate to even bring this up, but Israel-Palestine conflict is another point of contention within the party because the far left is saying we need to pay a lot more attention to the interests of Palestinian people, and the centrist part of the party is saying all things being equal on an international scale, we need to just not rock the boat. The decisions that the priorities of the in the international system, the regional security of the Middle East, et cetera, let's just not rock the boat. Because if you start to say too many things in favor of, say, Palestinian privileges, and again, I've tried to avoid this last time, but this is true as a political dynamic. Right. If you pay a little bit more attention to Palestinian interests, then you run the risk of not just like this whole anti-Semitism monster that could be unleashed, or certainly verbally is talked about quite a bit, or just letting down our ally Israel, who we need in this longer-term conflict for regional security and peace, et cetera, right? So these are tensions within the party. My point is that the leftern part of the farthest left part of the party doesn't control it. But more to your point, which I think is because you're like, hey, they sound leftist to me, right? I think the woke thing, to circle back to the woke issue, identity politics is a more appropriate term.
It's only part of what incorporates woke. Wokeism is bigger than identity politics. But we do need to come up with a term.
Yeah.
Those of us on the left who are in, considering the anti-woke left position.
And since you said the term us, I'll just mention, because me and you, I don't think we ever had this conversation before, but when I was agreed to be part of a progressive delegate slate for representing our community, it's really called the Progressive Labor Slate. It's 14 of us, representing the area from basically Santa Rosa down in Sonoma, all the way up to the Oregon border, and then all the way out to the Trinity. So it's only 14 of us from all this whole area. I was asked, hey, what does it mean to be progressive? Almost like, whether it was a litmus test or just an interview or whatever. And I said, honestly, I think both parties are severely broken. And the whole country, on behalf of the citizens, need someone to step in, some evolution that best reflects the kitchen table issues and applying pragmatism and solutions-based vision where we communicate clearly without vilifying, without pointing fingers, giving everybody the best benefit of the doubt of what they're trying to say, really engaging with people as citizens, as peers, as friends, as colleagues, as neighbors. And what that means to me, progressivism means we need more progress in many areas. And if you do the T-chart on any given policy, if you're like, hey, we need universal healthcare, right? As an example, you do the T-chart and you say, these are the costs, these are the benefits. And you say, there's probably more benefits than costs. Let's explore this, right? To me, that's not how the world works. So you learn that in grad school, political science. The very first class you take is like, nobody ever looks at a problem from the perspective of what's the best solution. It's about power. It's only about power. And so there's all these solutions being proposed. I think this guy's name is Kingdon. It's like a trash can model, it's called. But basically, like, there are people year after year after year with their solutions. This is the best idea. This is the best idea. This is the best idea. But only when a problem comes into place where someone's like, we better solve this thing right now. Give me all the solutions. Line up the power. The most powerful, that solution wins. So it's not that T-chart. So my point is that progressivism, at the very least, ought to be, you don't win just because you got more money. You don't win.
No, I think that's destroyed this. This is why, I'm all for overturning Citizens v. United, but money doesn't win the elections anymore, partly because money used to win the elections because television commercials were what influenced people, but nobody under 60 watches television anymore, right? So it's a social media strategy, but that doesn't cost a lot of money. You don't need $1 billion that Harris blew through.
So it's communication.
Yeah.
It's about having a virtuous, clear message that resonates with people, and you listen, and and actual true leadership. So I think that's we will. This is optimistic maybe to a fault. But that's the big takeaway here from this election, is that the team that had tons of money, influence, and power didn't win just because they had tons of money, influence, and power. They kind of lost the map on how to meet people where they are. Now we're only talking about a 1.5% difference, but the big thing, again, getting into the election, right? That's what I thought we were here for originally. It's interesting that I don't know if you were the one that I talked to about it, but somebody asked me, like, what made Joe Biden step aside? How did that even happen? Because the wagons were circled, the inner circle at the White House, the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, all the donor class, like all these people were like, let's just run him. Like, this is the plan, no matter what.
And then the debate happened.
But the debate happened, yeah. And then so that opened the door, because the debate was like, the emperor has no clothes. Like, whatever people were saying or thinking, now we know something different. And then so fast forward to that Obama still has influence in the party. There's his circle, his former staff members and speechwriters and thinkers around his circle and clique. That set of folks, along with actually Nancy Pelosi, came into the fold. And so the story is that Nancy Pelosi actually called Biden, and it was, the situation was like, the data that was, people that pay for really good data, they saw the little red arrows in across the whole country uptick. They called, I think they were saying little red mushrooms are popping up everywhere. The shift is happening. Like, the whole country, almost every county in the country, ended up shifting towards Trump. Like, if you look at the Washington Post on election night, it was pretty clear what was happening. These little red arrows, but we didn't know that at the time. Nancy Pelosi and those inner circle folks, they knew way back then after the debate. And the deal was, Joe's position was, hey, I got, it's all working out for us. We look good. And she said, put on your data guy, put him on the phone. And I want to know exactly what he's showing you. And they name names. Like, this is all New York Times, Washington Post. This is all Politico, Semaphore. This is widely reported that it was like, you guys are using the data that you want him to see. Use the data that we need him to see, basically, right? That's the short of it. And then that's when the shift started happening. And we could talk about the shift itself. But my point is this. The team that we decide, how could they possibly in good faith have communicated anything about change in a change election? And then so with that same team went to Harris ultimately. And we could, like, I'm skipping over the how she became the candidate, but it's known out there. So she becomes the candidate, and then she now has 3 months to take the same team with the same priorities, with the same contradictions or weaknesses or strategy, tactics, and then how do we take this through the finish line successfully? They basically stuck to something very, very similar. And I think we talked about how when Kamala was asked in that interview, hey, what would you do different? What happened while you were vice president that you would have done, that you think needs attention? And she was like, I wouldn't have done anything differently. That just shows that their communication strategy did not really, they weren't reading the room. They didn't get where people were. And so I'll just give you.
Well, they were okay for a while. It was when they abandoned, my view, is when they abandoned the populist message and started to make it look like the Clinton campaign. But that's a whole other story.
And picking Tim Walz, like we talked about when they picked Tim Walz.
I think that was a great move.
Because he was somebody who had accomplished a dozen or more progressive policies in Minnesota in a place where he had to get buy-in from Republicans by speaking to them in the way that makes sense. Like, for example, I think paid family leave. We're all just going to get paid family leave in Minnesota because every family needs to be together when they have a baby or when someone's in the intensive care. Give people paid days off to go deal with the real lives of all people, not some people, not privileged people, not people that have this job or that job, everybody. And Republicans are like, I'm down. And so it passed. And another example was paid lunches, paid school lunches. Turns out that during COVID, all kids got all their meals paid for. And that there's a problem across America that kids that get free lunches get bullied because they're like, oh, you're poor, we're going to beat you up, right? Not everywhere, but it happens. So if you just give everybody food, there's no bullying. Everybody's showing up fully charged for education. You don't have there's cognitive problems if you don't eat properly, right? You're giving everybody their best shot at getting an education. All kids, no groups. So Tim Walz, that was his general line of thinking. He's an NRA guy, hunter, played football coach, National Guard guy. He's an
economically, if you really analyze it, he's to the left of Bernie Sanders.
Wow, I would say he's in that same camp, basically. Yeah. But the point is that he could have been a tremendous asset, but they picked him in part to satisfy the left. Like I interviewed Fatma, who's the chair of the Democratic Caucus here in California, Democratic Party, and we had this conversation, and she basically was like, it would be better. I think she co-signed an article that was in Politico, or maybe she wrote it. I'm not sure, but or at least she was mentioned. The point is, she was quoted in this article, and so it was like, hey, pick Tim Walz. Because he's a guy that represents the base, the people that have to go out in the streets and convince people where they are in your community to vote Democratic. Pick that guy because he's got a winning message. He's collaborated across the aisle. He's not a partisan necessarily. He's a community engagement personality that has a track record of success. So Kamala did pick Tim Walz, and
also because Harris and he got along really well. That just hit off really well, better than Shapiro. You can't exclude the interpersonal and how they work together. I mean that is part of it. Shapiro probably, objectively speaking, was the smarter pick, but he was tied up in the whole thing with Israel. There was some labor disputes with him and the rest. Harris was definitely, I think, a better choice, broadly speaking. But two things. Shapiro might have carried Pennsylvania and he would have performed better in a debate against Vance because he's much better debater than Walz. But yeah.
But I think the VP debate didn't matter quite as much.
No, probably not. Although it did help that Vance was able to normalize himself in that debate, saying, "I'm not Trump. I got a brain."
Well, and I'm not weird.
Yeah.
Shook that branding off.
Yeah.
For people who were already disposed to think that about him, a lot of people made up their mind already. When that's a different thing,
right?
But my point here with this was that the tactical decisions to follow. Hey, what do our Moneyball experts think we ought to do? Not nobody was like, break out that Tim Walz guy and talk about those crossover issues that originated on the left, that seem a little bit populist, that have broad support, that could theoretically have broad support. It's not a time for risk. It's time to take it close to the vest, play that Moneyball game, say the things people want to hear. Donald Trump is X, Donald Trump is Y, and Donald Trump is Z, and run on that. Run against the personification that Democrats chose to put on Trump. Now the question is, this is getting a little bit deeper, and I don't mean to go in this direction. What's going to happen now? Are people's worst fears about Trump going to play out? Or is he really just like, is his superpower, he is like the ultimate, I was going to say troll, but I don't really mean troll. I mean, he can pick a cabinet around him that plays out like he's sending messages, he's signaling. Like if I want to pick the guy from the NIH, I'm going to pick the guy who was outspoken about COVID. If I want to pick the person who's going to, what's Tulsi, Director of National Intelligence, I'm going to go to the person who was highly critical of the intelligence community and go down the line. And so some people are saying that the EPA guy is really interested in undermining EPA's authority, EPA's influence over regulation. That put that guy forward. The Secretary of Defense, someone who is a Veterans Affairs outspoken person. People say, of course, I mean, I guess the unstated premise here, loyalty, number one. Loyalty was number one. Number two was, is this person going to be somewhat photogenic, somewhat out there in the that media space? Is this person, going to reflect positively on Trump's values, not to use his values, Trump's priorities, Trump's messaging? So that's most of it. But behind the scenes, I think, provocative. They're very provocative picks. And last thing I'll say,
except for Burgum, who I give 6 months before he quits.
So Eric and I, at one of the shows we did, we looked at the Project 2025, 900 pages of basically like conservative wish list, Heritage Foundation. It hits on every part of the government. How are we going to transform all these pieces of government? And many people looked at that and were like, this is pretty scary, or is this even possible? And then so one of the things we covered is, well, back in 2016, when Trump became president, they had one that was, the equivalent document from that period. This is a tradition of documents that go back to the 70s. Heritage Foundation's been producing these since the 70s. And it's with a long-term kind of, rightward shift of how they would like to see rightward shift in policies and sort of just structure of the federal government. Whenever there's a Republican in place, like in the 80s, Reagan administration adopted most of those things. Fast forward to, like I was starting to say, 2016, my recollection is that the article we saw showed that 95% of that project, whatever it was, 2017, that Trump put those policies in place within 6 months, 95%. So Heritage Foundation is one of those groups behind the scenes that almost like the Federalist Society with judges, where the Federalist Society is going to say, these are all the judges that are part of us. So if it's a Republican in power, Republicans are going to pick a Federalist Society judge set, right? So like the Supreme Court justices.
I mean, I'll tell you what the biggest fear I have from Project 2025, and that's the 45,000 federal employees. He wants to get Congress to set aside the civil service reforms that were passed during the progressive era.
Federal government employees.
Yeah, federal government employees, and fire 45,000 and replace them with loyalists. And they were supposedly interviewing people in the Iowa, pre-caucus things to see if they can get people to fill those positions. If he's able to do that, that's the scariest thing to me from Project 2025. And he's going to do what he did last time, which is to exclude all mention of climate change from any scientific document that's online. And he's going to do this, but can he undo the quote, the misnamed Inflationary Reduction Act? I don't think he can. This is one aspect in which the Biden administration was brilliant in. All right, so we've got these billions of dollars that are supposed to be subsidizing the transition away from oil technology over the next over the next decade or whatever it is. I forget how many years we're talking about because I'm drunk. But
it was over $1 trillion, and it was over 10 years funding. So it's hundreds of billions of dollars.
So is Trump going to cancel this funding? Well, I don't think he will, because in the 2 years between when it passed in 2022 and 2024, $500 billion of private investment was dedicated to committing themselves to this transition, to all of these different technologies, including EV technology. Will he try to reorient it? Maybe, but the brilliance in what Biden did was that about 80% of the money so far spent has been in red areas, in areas that are Republican areas. If he cancels it, we're going to lose about, 56 billion to foreign investors if we cancel this, because this is domesticating the EV technology that is basically taken off exponentially in both Asia and Europe. And so it's going to happen here no matter what, even though there's a lot of resistance to it by the oil industry. But Biden also, something that a lot of people don't realize, is that there is more drilling and production of oil, raw oil now, than there ever has been. He broke Trump's records on that, right? That is to transition it. Because so that people don't suffer larger gas prices that much. He also was brilliant in the fact that he just completely the emperor has no clothes with regard to using the reserves. Economists for decades were saying, if you use those reserves to lower oil prices on a temporary basis, it's going to hurt us in the long run. But it didn't, because what Biden did was that he released the money into it, and then when the prices dropped, rebought the oil at those reduced prices.
Has he rebought? Because I'm pretty sure we're still significantly lower than prior.
Significantly lower, but not such that it's problematic. If we have an emergency, we've got plenty there. But he did this, and I don't know that Trump can really interfere with that without basically causing inflation.
I'm going to throw this out there just for my own personal enjoyment. I think climate change is one of those things that people have been, it's one of those words that people have heard so often that they just callously throw out. Have either of you guys looked, like, what is your basis of knowledge on current climate and climate over the past few thousand years?
My wife has a first cousin who's an oceanographer who says that who has studied the data in detail, and I trust her because I know her. And she says, we are fucked.
No matter what,
on the basis that there is going to be massive change due to the influx of
CO2
gases into CO2 into the atmosphere. And yes, it has happened in the past during volcanoes and when meteors have hit the planet and the rest. But the point is this time it is man-made, and it can be reversed on a man-made basis. She has gone into it in detail with me, a lot of stuff that I didn't really understand, but she goes into the stuff, and she's somebody who's just an absolutely remarkable person. She would not buy into this. She's actually voted Republican, and the rest as an ideology. And yes, I am convinced that we are in a process that is reversible if we would reduce the release of gases. That's anecdotal. I know I'm one person that's done it, but yes, we need to do this. We are actually near the peak of it. There's actually a report that we are actually near the peak in terms of our release of gas, but because of the changes we've already made, probably within the next 5 years, we're going to actually be reducing.
We're actually down substantially.
Yeah, the gas
currently we're down.
Yeah, so it's so it will have, there's a lag effect. It's kind of like the Balrog's whip. It takes you send it, and it takes a while for it to have an effect. It's not going to have a noticeable effect on it. And yes, climate change is natural. We have it, but not this quickly. Not in a few. It's usually changes in centuries. What has changed in decades?
What is not this quickly? When you say that, what are you referencing?
In terms of the impact on our water supplies, on everything, and actually we're doing pretty well right now.
But impact, what do you mean on our water supplies?
On the fact that we had like 6 years of straight of drought because of the ridiculously resilient pressure thing that kept rain out of California for 5 or 6 years. That might be past, by the way. It may not come back, but because the Colorado River in its depletion, where it doesn't even reach the Baja, California. Gulf of Baja California anymore during parts of the year. It didn't happen that way before. Now, yes, we do have changes like that are natural. The fact that the Kilimanjaro, I mean, we have this Hemingway short story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro. That might be like people are going to think that's a term of irony in the future because there's hardly any snow on it. Glaciers are melting, things are happening. But it may be reversed. It may actually come to be reversed over the next couple of decades. People may not have to suffer, and we will have Biden to thank for that particular legacy because we are the second most greenhouse gas stuff, and China is now benefiting from it, from the green technology. So we may actually move away from it. Not only though, there's other benefits to.
Did you know China's actually opening up more coal plants than they have?
Yeah.
I was going to say I'm far more pessimistic than Eric.
Right.
It's fascinating. I believe he was.
I think we're doomed in a way of our way of life compared to what
makes you say that? Do you know what current CO2 levels are?
I'll say it this way. 90-ish% of people who are experts in this field have
going back to the experts.
Exactly.
Going back to the experts.
They have a laundry list.
I want to talk to these experts.
Yeah, we can.
You can.
I've talked to some of them and they disagree.
So what I'm going to say is that there's a laundry list of metrics of impact.
But what is your understanding?
Okay, we're getting there.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I'm just trying to shift away from the experts for a second.
Right.
Yeah, but my point is that obviously I came here to talk about the election, not climate change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I just bit on that because I'm always fascinated where people.
So there's a laundry list of metrics indicating changes over time that have accelerated. The organization that I work for has a part of it is called the Earth Journalism Network. So it's thousands of journalists from around the world who are reporting on changes in their own communities and things that their communities are doing to prepare
to mitigate
and to mitigate. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So it's when I say doomed, I just mean it's happening, not that it's the end of the way. It's not that we will have to make adaptations is the bottom line.
What is happening?
So like sea level rise, for example, that's like if you look at the Bay here, right? The California Transportation, Caltrans. They had to put into the improvement plan that they're working on right now. But one of the elements of that, Humboldt Bay Keepers, I talked to somebody from there. They had to put in place a line item that said, if we see that road covered by water X number of days, X number of times per year, then we have to take action. Like, so they're putting in, they anticipate that the water will come up because it comes up. It's not just going to come up over the bay.
It's pretty scary from the other side of it now.
Yeah. So for example,
see that 30 years ago.
So like Samoa Boulevard that goes around the bay, for example, that's all supposed to be ultimately underwater within some finite period of time. So they'll probably need to have like elevated roads that connect, say, for example, McKinleyville side, like Arcata, but that side of the bay, there will be need for elevated roads to connect that to, like, for example, on the other side, south of College of the Redwoods, on the South Bay. So the bay, from the North Bay to the South Bay, the risk is that, huge sections of Eureka, for example, water will encroach on. It's just a question of when. So that's the type of thing that all coastal communities are having to deal with. Also, heat. People will start to put in place laws that say you have a right to take a water break, something like that, because some communities in like Texas experienced 100-degree heat for weeks on end where they didn't used to have to be quite that hot. Things like this, where places that used to only be 110 might be 130. Places that used to get X number of 100-year storms now are going to get like 5, 10 times that number of 100-year storms. So flooding and erosion, things like that. When I say doomed, I don't mean doomed. What I mean is there will be consequences according to these people. There's a list. There's a long list of the types of things that'll happen. I think what's more interesting, like I know you're trying to do like, hey, I'm a skeptic and I want you to give me data.
No.
I don't have data.
I'm fascinated because
I think the mitigation is the more interesting question. What do we do
I'm
about
interested in the understanding of what climate change means, because you're talking about all of these
Temperature
steps.
change.
Yes, but these steps that these organizations
Temperature
are
change, less rain in certain areas.
more severe floods,
Loss
areas that didn't
loss
happen
of
before, like North
glaciers.
Carolina.
Slow down for a second.
Yeah.
What is the temperature increased over the past 100 years?
They're talking about that 1.5 centigrade
but
issue.
the aggregate isn't the issue.
It's not the that's
Yeah.
not
I just
the
wanna-
benchmark.
I
Right.
just
Have you seen the color map of the world where it says this is the average temperature when we started taking these measurements? This is the average temperature now. You used to see red, yellow, blue,
Are you aware of
red,
the
yellow,
heat
blue.
island
Now it's just
effect?
red, red.
Definitely. But you understand, one of the things that people say is, well, they, whoever they are, said that we're going into a new ice age back in the 70s. It's not the same people who said that, by the way. There were a number of climatologists who met with President Johnson in 1965 warning about the impact of fossil fuel emissions and its warming impact. So they were not in agreement that we're going into an ice age, or if we were going to go in an ice age, maybe that got reversed. But the ice age people are different. But yet you'll hear people say, well, they said we were going into an ice age.
To be clear, Exxon's own data from the 70s says this is the consequence of
Yes.
fossil fuel use. It's not like anybody doubts what's happening except for, maybe you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm joking. I'm joking. I'm totally joking. I don't mean to. That's a cheap shot. Of course, Trump's administration is going to proceed as if it's not a thing. But really,
they will facially. I don't think they're going to.
Right. The
undo
military
this.
itself, the U.S. military itself has contingency plans. They know, and
Yeah.
they
I
have
don't
to
think
plan.
anybody's arguing that the climate changes. My point of contention is how much of that is based on CO2,
Yeah.
which I don't think we've quite touched on yet.
Right. And again, we
Because that's the big selling point for the current
science
climate
is
change
never
narrative.
100%. But again, the data of the correlation is pretty tight. The correlation is not necessarily causation.
Okay, what is your interpretation of the data? Give me something
See,
concrete.
if I
But
had my cousin
isn't that
here,
funny? Is we all throw out these terms because we've heard them so often.
So did you see Inconvenient Truth, the Al Gore?
Yeah, Al Gore's premises has been completely
no, it has.
proven to be false.
It
Al Gore's
hasn't.
predictions.
That is
Al Gore's
There's a difference
predictions.
between premise and prediction.
right.
Okay, so what his book is based off is not true. We've passed his date. I don't remember. It was 2020 or something. Completely false.
Just like Malthus had a false date and Paul Ehrlich had a false date about the impact of population and the rest. There was a debate. There was a guy who had a bet with Paul Ehrlich saying that choose one of 10 of these precious substances that we're going to run short of, and over the next 10 years. And Paul Ehrlich lost that because in that 10 years, none of those 10 objects declined. However, if you did if you had taken that debate and extended over 40 years, there are actually declines in it. And I'm too drunk to remember the details of the policy, but the point is that when they get specific about their predictions, when they set dates and specific numbers and the rest, that's a mistake. But in the aggregate, it's still the case.
So there's like simple things that you can see. There's a community I saw in the Maryland South Shore area where the whole town is underwater now. So it's not like things aren't happening. The people there's this really interesting shot
Florida.
where one guy just built his house up, right? Yeah, and like where, regardless of I just don't feel like,
and places in the Indian Ocean. I mean, there's literally islands that used to exist that are practically underwater.
like the president of the Maldives came
yeah.
and said like, we're screwed here in the Maldives.
It's not happening. Now, tying it to the release of CO2 by our industrialization and our car use, again, there is correlation. the dispute is whether there's causation. Correlation and causation are two different things.
Yeah. So this is what I was going to say, is that there is an agenda for people to say we need to make drastic changes rapidly in our energy output map, the set of things that we use for energy. But there are other people, like I heard Elon Musk speak, and he's like, look, we need every energy source we have. We need to ramp up as much energy as fast as we can. He said, like, if we're going to convert to electric this, electric that in our homes, computers, servers, all the things, he's shown like if you could look at the charts from the Department of Energy too, like energy use is up dramatically. So it is really an all the above type solution that's going to happen. So I think that, the fossil fuel industry's agenda to say, like, let's not even talk about zeroing out fossil fuels. They're right. You're not zeroing out fossil fuels. And so that, to me, that's kind of like it's a communications issue again, right? Like we have to get to the point where we're realistic about the energy that we need. We're realistic about the cost of climate mitigation. And it really just means more projects, more innovation, human adaptability and resilience. But when I use the term doomed, I just meant like, no, it's happening. There's been studies that have said you don't, like, I think during the Trump administration, the EPA it wasn't the EPA, it was Department of Energy came out with it came out with a study where it's like, actually don't do anything to mitigate for climate change because it's already inevitable. It's already like, you don't take away U.S. competitiveness in lowering carbon emissions because it's not going to help in a world where everyone else, like you said, China comes out with a coal plant per week.
There are other reasons to convert to EV too. I mean, so that's
EV is not a clean energy by any stretch.
No, it's not. There's no such thing as a clean energy.
Well, nuclear is
a big solution.
Nuclear is actually, and I actually am open to the idea of expanding nuclear with a new technology, especially the liquid core technology. There's a whole generation of environmentalists that are like taking another look at it. If you have a liquid core, you don't have a chance of a meltdown, so you don't have the same level of crisis. And if you have smaller rather than larger plants and they're distributed throughout the stuff, that could actually be a benefit. But what I want to get back.
Wait, I want to ask one follow-up. Right. So I think we're all in agreement that the climate is changing.
Yes.
I don't know that anybody's arguing that.
I thought you were.
No, the climate's changing.
No, the question is whether or not we could do anything about it.
No, the question is it because of CO2 and man-made emissions? Yeah. That's the question. And it seems like
because that's the variable.
Yes.
That's the variable. The constant is, I mean, we've had, I think, 4 volcanic eruptions of significant levels since then, and that's usually what adds to it. You need, when we've had changes this quickly in the past in our natural history, it's because there were like a bunch of volcanic or eruptions within a few 100,000 years, or we had a meteor hit the planet which killed the dinosaurs and other things. Similar things like that lead to the punctuated equilibrium of climate change. It's usually the climate change that we're experiencing now is usually over centuries, not decades. And so we are experiencing things like that. We had our first major drought in California in recorded history in the 70s. It was a big one. It lasted like about 3 or 4 years. And you would see Mount Shasta only had snow on the top. Then it ended and everybody thought it was fine. But then we had another one in the late 80s, and then another one in the early 2000s, and another one that lasted forever for that. To say that it's not related when we don't really have that quickly of droughts going back for hundreds of years, it's really hard to deny the correlation.
That's not that hard.
I think it's the modeling. No, I think the modeling is the question, right? So if you look back to like Industrial Revolution, 1850-ish, generally speaking, the trend is people that are experts in the field, that's what they're able to say. hey, we had the Industrial Revolution. This tracks.
What tracks?
And then the vehicles.
The increase in temperature tracks with the increase in carbon. So to your point, but what the modeling is, well, we don't know how much carbon is going to get absorbed by the oceans. We don't know how much the reflection from the polar caps and how much that is going to affect the heat that gets reflected back up versus
Well, we do know that the carbon sinks in like the Amazon forest are disappearing. So it's just, and
so there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah,
there's a lot of moving the models
parts
in terms of predicted capacity.
Right. That in Brazil, for instance, the massive logging, that might be a factor more than the release of it. We don't know. All we know is we have correlation that it is moving faster than it should, given the natural occurrences.
Based on what time frame?
So
based on the time frame of the past 100, now almost 200 years of the
Industrial
Industrial
Revolution. But don't you think that
Revolution.
that's such a short time period to look at?
No, but they can
Yes,
go back.
because the changes are happening over such a short time period.
That's the thing. They can go back with these ice cores and stuff. They go back way, way, way back. And so they're able to see like a baseline established.
Yeah,
and
but
then
if you go
Industrial
back,
Revolution.
the data shows that we're actually essentially still in an ice age and coming out of an ice age.
Right.
That's what the data shows.
That's
thought,
right.
yeah.
That's right.
But so let me say it this way too, that I still like to go back to the idea of it's about what we do about it.
Well, we were also talking about what Biden had done and how the fact that Trump is probably not going to be able to undo that without causing major economic problems.
Where I was going with all of this, I had a guy, a physicist on, I believe he was the director at the Department of Energy under Trump, and fascinating guy. And he doesn't believe that the correlation for CO2 is what it's been blown out to be.
No,
he's a complete skeptic. I mean,
but he was an oil industry hack for decades.
Are you aware of him?
Yes, and that's why he was hired. I mean, I'm not saying
they get paid to do it. Like,
He did have data to substantiate some of his claims.
Sure,
I mean,
he did.
Are you aware of the current levels of CO2 parts per million? I believe it's like 420 parts per million, and at 200 parts per million, plants die. Everything dies.
So two things here. Well, firstly, the thing I've been trying to say for a while, I'll just get it out there. I've been on a call before with a guy who's the head of like climate studies at Stanford. Our state senator, Mike McGuire, has these town halls, and he brings in people from CAL FIRE and other people that have to do with the water supply and the climate experts. He brings in this guy, like one of the foremost experts, director of this group. He actually said that it's faster. Like I know I'm going to say, Eric, you had said one thing earlier, but what he said is we are observing indicators that validate that we have some predictive capacity, but also that the thing that we feared would happen within 100 years is going to be happening in 10 years. We should have him on. We should talk to him. We should get the scientists in here. But my point is that the people that pay attention to the data, they think it's a done deal.
They're terrified.
Yeah, but that's not true.
It is.
It depends on the experts that you're looking at.
9 out of 10.
Yeah, but that's the same. 9 out of 10 doctors said that you should wear a mask, and 9 out of 10 doctors say that
I know we're cyclical here.
No, but I think it's an important point to point out that just because somebody is an expert doesn't directly validate what they're saying.
So let's stay in one lane, though.
Okay, so pick a lane.
Yeah.
So climate.
And I'm not sure that 9 out of 10 people said that about masks. I know that they said about the vaccines. But
and that's been disproven as well. So
no, it hasn't.
The efficacy of the vaccine has completely been disproven.
It saved my mother's life.
I won't argue with you, but but the data tells a different story. The experts tell a different story.
Just because I like you.
I'm just playing devil's advocate.
Yeah, I hear you. Just because I enjoy this. When it comes to vaccines, I think we were told things about the vaccine that didn't play out, like how long they would be effective, and the fact that and
that people wouldn't
transmit.
Okay, so take
carriers.
That. You don't think that some of that could also translate to other fields like climate?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That we could be told
it all comes down to interpretation.
But this is a consensus that's been around for decades.
That's not true.
It has been
a consensus among some experts, and some experts
among climatologists.
Some climatologists push back.
There's always somebody that is going to say something differently, and they're going to base it on data that they select. And granted, everybody's got it, but the people who believe that we're in a crisis don't want to believe that we're in a crisis. They would rather not.
But they've also been making extrapolations based on their data that have continued to fall short.
Yeah. But what is the monetary interest behind them as opposed to the
there's billions and billions of dollars in pushing the climate change.
There's also
so there's a huge financial
there's also
and there is the other way.
The financial interest coming from the oil industry.
So both of them
that do that.
That's what I'm getting at. These narratives, and that's why I touched on it initially, is because climate change just gets thrown out, but we're all just quoting experts. We're not talking about the data. I don't know if you've seen the data. I've only seen a small portion of it that leads me to question some things, but we just go back, the experts.
So, I mean, I read a lot but there's only so much time in a day, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So the people that go down and dirty into the data on this stuff, I think that's let's defer to a later date to get into the specifics on what they, if there's room for skepticism. But I like to go back, because I'm a politics guy and a policy guy. I like to go back to what do we do about it? And I think that part of the coalition of skepticism is like what Eric was referring to, is that the overreaction of let's just call it an anti-carbon coalition, the coalition of anti-carbon folks, that they have an agenda. They do. So that it's true that they're going to kind of stick together and harmonize their message. But then what's more important as a citizen is their policy prescriptions, which if that means no gas-powered cars in the future, then it affects me as a citizen because I care about cars a lot. When I talk to farmers in California, when I talk to, I talked to a rice farmer, and I said, hey, what's the deal from northern, Malfe's district in eastern Northern California? Because I said, hey, I heard a Republican legislator from Sacramento say how much farm equipment is electric? How many of those trucks that bring all the food to the table, how all the systems of farming, how much of that could we realistically convert to electric, and how soon? We're not there.
No,
right?
Not even close.
Yeah. So extrapolate that across, if you look at every county in America, all 3,000 counties, the vast majority of them are red. They're Republican. They're leaning on the side of, hey, you all want to promote this climate change narrative, and you want to change policies that affect all of us. Well, how much are if you look at any given industrial sector, how much are they having to adapt? Why do I have to give up my car? That kind of thing when it's not possible or perceivably not possible. Let's look at other ways to reduce our energy footprint. How much are we, for example, how much are we investing in insulating existing homes so that we don't have to use as much heating and air conditioning? If the average temperature is really going up by 3 or 5 degrees in certain communities, and we need that much more electric, are we going to spend that much? Are we going to burn that much more of our fossil fuels, or are we going to invest in insulating homes or incentivize people investing? That's Eric's point, was that when the Inflation Reduction Act's putting forward $1 trillion+ over the decade, private money comes in and says, oh, these investments are on the table. Let's make these types of investments.
And it means that the voters in those districts are going to want to maintain these technologies because they don't want to be laid off. I mean, it's amazing because like for instance, the I think it's Toyota, but I can't remember. Somebody's opening up an electrical vehicle somewhere in Georgia, in rural Georgia, right? I mean, this is where they're doing it. The people who are looking forward to this factory being built, as it's being built, are saying, well, I know that Trump's going to make it so that it's going to be regular cars and not electrical cars being built there. It's not going to happen because the whole factory is set up around EV technology. So Biden, this whether you agree with him or not, you have to say that the administration's decision to put the primary investment in the red districts was brilliant, because it means it's going to be invested, and that means we're going to be moving towards EV technology. Not only that, because tourists, any state that wants to have tourism coming from California or New York or even Texas is going to have to account for that in their infrastructure. They're going to want to have charging stations there, and they're going to want subsidies for it. So they're going to demand that of the federal government. Biden pretty much set it up that if Trump really does try to pull the plug on it, it's going to cause major economic disruption, and they will lose both houses of Congress in 2026, right? So he probably isn't going to do that. He's probably going to orient it, maybe move more of the remaining 20% that's being invested into blue areas, into red areas, and claim some type of victory there. But he's not going to, most likely not going to want to undermine the economy, even with Musk saying, well, working people are going to have to put up with a little bit of suffering in the short term because they'll benefit in the long term. Well, they're not going to want to hear that. We've learned that inflation is now the third rail. If he aggravates inflation again, he's out, they're out, and they're lame duck for the rest of the thing. So Biden set this up really well. I mean, people were like saying, well, why are you putting all of these materials into the red areas, into the Republican districts? Well, it's because now they're going to be invested in it, and they have to do it. And with $500 billion in private investment following up, I think if Trump really tries to affect that, but he doesn't care about the Republicans, but he's going to lose his Congress in 2026. So it's probably good, safe until then. We'll see. It's a little bit kind of probably one of the more brilliant things that his administration has done, but I don't think they're going to be reversing this. And I know that Musk is kind of upset because his Teslas used to be 90% of the cars sold in California. I think it's down to like between 60 and 70% now because everybody else is moving in and they're demanding, uniform chargers. Tesla's got their chargers, and everybody else has a uniform charger.
Haven't they all been adopting his charger?
They started to.
Yeah, they started
a
to.
number of different companies.
Yeah, so it's going to be, different in that. But is he going to pull out of Tesla and just focus on his SpaceX thing because he thinks he could get subsidies from the government? I don't know. But this is one of those big contradictions. This is how he got rich, right? So I really think that's it'll be one of the promises, like having Mexico pay for the partial wall or jailing Hillary Clinton, that he's not going to keep. Those are promises he's not going to keep. Will he go on a revenge thing and have the DOJ investigate the 2020 election? I don't know, but
I think an important part of that bill too was, it was like 20 or 30 different things. It isn't just energy.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and a lot of it was investing in innovation. So,
will they kill the wind project locally? That's what I'm concerned.
Do you think that they should?
No.
Are you guys familiar with wind technology at all?
Yeah, I am, and I think it's a big problem. But it will, if it goes through, not just local, but Morro Bay would power up 21 million houses, and I don't think they're going to do it, whether or not it's there or not. Yeah, kills birds.
I kind of want them to pull that partially. I'm kind of interested to see what he does there.
Well, Rex Bone doesn't.
Rex Bone wants that?
He's
I don't
all
think any of
invested
those.
in it.
I don't think any of those people on the board have any understanding at any level.
No, they just want the
wind
jobs.
power. Yeah,
they want the jobs.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, you said you hope they pull it up. Did you want to go down that path?
Yeah, I've looked into some. Obviously, the high decibel sonar and everything that's killing the whales on the East Coast is problematic.
Yeah, but that's for the creation of it. Once the windows.
Yeah, but we have
are in place.
migratory whales.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact, do you know how they dispose of the turbine blades that have to be replaced?
Probably
like 8
landfill?
years. Bury them.
Yeah.
Bury them.
Yeah.
Pretty green.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not going to bring down energy
But
prices.
it's the same thing with solar, though. There's downsides to that as
solar's
well.
Not great
But
either.
but the fact of the matter is, the Exxon Valdez spill killed more birds than the wind industry did for that whole decade. So it's just there's trade-offs and downsides to every technology.
I look at the wind farm here locally. I think it would be a boom and bust.
Yep.
And that's what terrifies me, is because it's going to leave it's going to leave the county worse off when it does bust.
Why do you think it'll bust?
Well, if you look at, I believe it's the UK that has built wind farms, and energy prices have skyrocketed because the technology is terrible. Its conversion rate from wind to energy is abysmal. It's a freaking joke.
Yeah, but this is
Not to
supposed to
mention,
be an improvement.
Germany
on that.
has been tearing down their wind farms as fast as they can to build coal farms.
But
but
supposedly that's dated technology, just like the nuclear technology.
Then why wouldn't you update? Why would you tear it all down and build coal plants rather than just.
Well, the
replace
issue with
technology.
Germany, actually, I was going to mention this earlier too, but it's geostrategic. It's the fact that so much of their natural gas supply and oil supply came from Russia, and they made the decision a while back to zero out nuclear energy just because of political reasons, and similarly zero out coal. But they have tons of coal, and there's.
So why tear down the wind farms?
Well, I'm not talking about wind farms
because
in particular.
it's outdated.
But it's still supposedly beneficial
yeah, but
to
it's
some
it's
regard.
not the same technology that is proposed for this one. It is advanced. That was
How much more advanced?
A lot more, because this is basically whenever you
The
start,
nuclear state advanced.
Yeah, whenever you start an industry, initially there's problems with it, and then there's like a race to improve it. Everything from oil even is improved. Nuclear, like I'm
not arguing
about.
nuclear. I'm arguing
No.
wind farm.
I'm saying that the technology that people like me were getting arrested protesting in the 1980s is not the same technology that is now available and will be available over the next 10 years. As I said, the smaller, more decentralized for the thing with the liquid cores is infinitely different from the big things that they drop on top of a nuclear on top of a major earthquake fault. The technology has improved. We don't need those big cores anymore, so it doesn't present as much danger to it. Supposedly,
And they're self-extinguishing too. But
right. Supposedly, the technology that's being proposed offshore is like considered, miles ahead of what they're dismantling in England. They've said that in their.
But, okay, so give me something concrete.
I don't have
But
it.
see,
I'm not-
that's what I'm getting
Yeah.
at.
So let me say this about wind. One of the local leaders, the vice chair of the Yurok tribe, Frankie Meyer, when I talked to him, Myers, I think that's at the end, sorry.
Yeah.
When I talked to him, he said that it's a good idea in theory, but let's test it. Let's do a little pilot project. Let's see how it works. Let's see if we, is it cost benefit analysis? Does it pencil out? Does it harm our wells? Is there a problem? Let's try it. And I think the whole sort of the industrial argument is economies of scale. They're like, well, pilot projects aren't going to pencil out. You need scale. So it's one of those chicken or the egg things. Are we going to do a pilot project, or does it have to be a full blown, major footprint? I don't have skin in the game when it comes to wind necessarily, but I do realize that France, about 85% of their power is nuclear. Like they found a way to pull it off and safely. They actually have seen where you can go and just take a little train ride down into the ponds where they put the nuclear rods for the next 10,000 years or whatever. If we're serious about a carbon-free footprint, we need power when the wind's not blowing and when the sun's not shining. And either we come up with some innovation breakthrough, or we let some of these nuclear scientists who have evolved to like nuclear I can speak to.
I wish Germany would refire up its nuclear power
I think we
than
should
coal.
just do nuclear.
The fourth generation stuff. Like right now, we have first generation plants in America. The scientists now have gone through multiple permutations, including small. They've got like community size little thing. And some people are obviously very afraid of it. But again, I think pilot projects are important. I know Bill Gates has put a lot of money behind, I forget the name, Terra something. But people are saying like, hey, like we kind of have to do this because we need, like I said earlier, right? That Elon Musk has said, we are going to keep using more and more and more power. Does wind investment pencil out? I'm not confident that it does, but we do need to figure this out. As the world develops, we're going to keep using more and more power. Do you ever hear? I'm going to go left field here for a second. Do you ever hear of the physicist? What's his name? Michio Kaku. Yeah. So I've seen him speak before, and he's like, okay, there's 3 types of civilizations on planets around our galaxy here, Milky Way. There's the type 0, which is us, which we probably have not figured out how to have peace on our planet, and we certainly have not figured out how to capture enough energy from the sun to fuel our planet and live in equilibrium with the planet. And then there's like a level 1 civilization probably, which can get enough energy from its sun, and if it doesn't have resource wars, it can find peace, and that's going to be a sustainable civilization. And then there's like a type 2 civilization probably out there, which is someone who's people who have entities who have figured out how to go to other stars, right? So we're a 0. And so part of not being a 0 is let's just figure out how to use the resources we have in balance. And I think that's, I know it sounds like it's left field, but right now we can't even talk to each other about it. That's my point. From a problem-solving perspective, this is where I started before, whether we're talking about healthcare or energy or medicine, or response to viral outbreaks. I'm trying to think of some of the other policies we touched upon, but we still don't even talk to each other. So I do think there's a benefit to things like forums like this where we don't. Who knows if we agree on anything? But the idea is that you're like, hey, I'm going to call your bluff here. What do you know about this? Or I'm going to dig deeper. I'm going to drill down. This doesn't happen like in the places where it needs to happen. Where did I just see this? Oh my goodness. Who is the thinker that I just saw a thinker that said this? But the idea is that, it was Cornel West. So Cornel, we were talking about race and woke and stuff, right? So Cornel West in his book, oh my God, what's the name of it? But anyway, Cornel West wrote, these issues will be solved locally. Now, not to say he's the greatest thinker on many things, but when it comes to like, how do we deal with the differences and the fact that, we're all brothers and sisters, no matter what we look like, their race is a social construct that we somehow have allowed to be divisive. And the only way it's not going to be divisive is at a local level, the community, we figure out how to talk to each other. I feel that same way about wind power. We need to figure out how to talk about, like, when the Yurok tribe points to, not to say Frankie fully represents them, but he's the vice chair. And so when he says, like, I think we as a community ought to figure out how to get living in harmony with our environment, this could be a good way. We should meet him where he is. And so if there is skepticism about the cost benefit, that's what we bring to the table.
Well, that's
speaking of Cornel West, by the way, I'm trying to track it down and I'll send it to you when I find it. But apparently he had a dialogue with Adolf Reed some years back that apparently is very interesting. But
nice.
You're exactly right. I think that's a great way to put a pin in this topic is you have to have the conversations. And where I go to with that is, did you read the article about the RCEA rejecting the nuclear power from down south?
No.
Oh, so they rejected it. And the reason they said they rejected it was because it's not green. And how could they as an energy authority support something that's not green? They've since reversed their stance.
That there's a plaque outside the old nuclear plant here from the Sierra Club. I've never been able to track it down, but apparently there's a plaque outside because at the time it first was introduced, the Sierra Club thought of it as a green technology.
But that's exactly the point. Is had anybody on that board had a conversation or had anyone from the public that might be more knowledgeable say, hey, this is actually the greenest energy we have available. Why would we not want that? We as taxpayers are already going to pay for it.
I mean, I still want to know what you're going to do with the reactors when they're done. We don't have a real good answer for that.
It's got to be better than burying wind turbines in the ground. It's got to be better than that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, and I also don't think we should be building massive plants on top of, one of the most active earthquake things.
I think Microsoft is building mini nuclear reactors to power AI because they know that
well, that's Bill Gates's enterprise.
Right,
that's what I was referring to.
I do want to let's take a slight pivot here.
We were talking about actually the I wanted to give another name here for people to read. Anna Khachiyan. If you Google "welcome to" or meet the anti-woke left, you'll find that Amber Frost and Anna Khachiyan are both in that article. Anna Khachiyan considers herself to be a left-winger, but she voted for Trump this time around. And she's good friends with, what's the name of the guy who got fired from Fox, but is like one of the, not Terry, he interviewed our Arcata person. Anyway,
Tucker
Carlson. Yeah, he's good friends with him, and even after Tucker Carlson reported being attacked by a demon in his bed, scratched or whatever, didn't take pictures of the scratches. But she voted for Trump, and she believes that she has left-wing reasons to do it. Anna Khachiyan, let me just look at it. That's what I looked up for. Khachiyan, part of the Red Scare podcast, is worth talking to, I don't agree with her on a bunch of stuff, including voting for Trump, but she has left-wing reasons for voting for Trump. So I think it's a very interesting part of the discussion. Amber Frost, I believe, didn't vote for Trump, but they're both consider themselves part of what's called the dirtbag left. I think that there is going to be a movement. I think that it is going to gain traction. It's small right now, but when you take the academics like Adolph Reed and then the cultural critics like Kachin and Frost and others, and you go to Jacobian, even Rolling Stones got some of this aspects of it, and a couple of the Michael Brooks show. I think that there is a trend that may get some traction now because, first of all, they all backed Bernie. And now even people like David Brooks and James Carville are saying, maybe we need to talk to the Bernie people. There may be some movement here. It might be small at the moment, but it's the type of thing that can snowball. And it's going to take a whole level of a movement because I think that one of the most self-destructive and stupid, I'm sorry, I know, and Dave might disagree with me, slogans of the left has been defund the police.
I don't disagree with you.
Okay, you do disagree, or you do agree with me. All right, so, I mean, when you have to, out of the gate, explain that defund doesn't really mean defund, you got a problem. Right? You're when you're defending your wording before you get out there. Now, we all agree that the police should have support from mental health. There should probably even be specially trained mental health units to come and deal with mental health situations, right? And the rest. But defund the police was stupid because black people are the people who suffer the most from crime. And they're like saying, okay, no, I don't always like cops, but they're all we've got right now, right? And they've rejected that in this time around. We need to really think, and when you hear leftists say, well, we need to listen to people of color, it's like, okay, but don't pick and choose which people of color you want to listen to. Don't just pick academics like Ibrahim Kendi. And I'm not saying he's got nothing to offer. I think that he's an important writer in history, but or the Black Lives Matter women, I'm forgetting their names right now, and the rest.
Yeah, we talked to them at the convention, and they come from a good place. And when you say like, "Hey, that's very divisive," and it's actually the pendulum swings back a lot stronger when you alienate people in every community in America like that,
right? Including the black.
But what they'll say is, what I've heard people say is, it's important for us because this is where we live. This is our lived experience. We think that if we can't impact the way policing occurs in our community, we need to do it a different way. And by saying we're going to take away their money, we get attention.
But if their neighbors are saying you guys are fucking idiots, then we need to listen to that too.
Yeah.
Right? If there are people in there that don't have the college degrees and don't have a history of activism or saying that, then we need to do that. I mean, the school district board members got recalled in San Francisco. San Francisco is like the most liberal city in the place, but when they weren't reopening schools and when they were threatening to paint over murals that were painted by socialist leftists because it offended somebody.
Did you hear about this, by the way? Eric did a show about it. I was a guest on his show. I learned about it.
I'll have to check it out.
George Washington High School.
Historic murals.
And what it showed was Native Americans who'd been shot to death and black people in chains under slavery.
So they wanted to change the name of the school and paint over the historic
They
murals.
wanted to do that. It was not, this was not pro-slavery or pro, Indian massacre. It's showing students what the reality is.
That's wild.
That they're there and they wanted to take it down. Luckily, Reverend Amos Brown, who's a, black activists and the rest, shut that down, and other people said, no, you're not going to paint over those murals. Those are part of our history. These are, it was a Russian immigrant socialist who painted it, and is saying, this is, it's so that people don't feel comfortable about it, right? That was the whole point of it. And anyway, a couple of board members, they're like, people were saying, okay, let's not paint over it. We'll just put curtains over it. And they were like saying, no, it's got to be painted over, right? And they wanted to rename a bunch of schools, including, what is the name of the conquistador that went through Mexico? Cortez, right? They thought that Cortez was named after the conquistador. It wasn't. It was named after a mayor that was actually progressive, but they just assumed it was the conquistador, right? Stupid stuff. So they got themselves recalled in San Francisco, arguably the most left-wing city in the thing. So there is a rebellion about this. And the DA...
I knew it.
We're going places.
Yeah.
I look at the left as that iconic image of the snake eating its own tail. And it's just going around.
Well, in the circular firing squads, yes. But, that's...
I got to ask, speaking of change and potential idiocracy, Biden just allowed Ukraine to shoot missiles into Russia.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. Not the missiles necessarily, but Ukraine. But we also have Israel right now.
Yeah.
Obviously in Lebanon, obviously continuing.
Real quickly on Ukraine, I think that's to allow Ukraine to obtain a negotiation advantage when Trump goes in to try to sell them out.
Risky option when Russia's counters with ICBL.
They're not going to, but they're not going to take it further than that.
But you didn't want to go down that road, right? You wanted to
I want to talk about
Israel. We didn't get to that
because you had mentioned something
before
earlier.
you even ask. I just wanted you to know. I looked at our last time we talked, your video clip on YouTube, and the comment at the top, because I couldn't avoid seeing it. I just wanted to see that it was there. I was just checking it out. Like, this is his site, right? I was going to share with somebody. The comment was, hey, your guest did a really good job of making it clear they didn't want to talk about Israel-Palestine and very tactfully pivoted away from saying anything about it.
Let's go right in.
So that was me.
Because, you commented that?
No.
Oh, you read
I'm the one who pivoted away.
I thought you were trying to say you all...
I pivoted away.
Let's pivot into it.
Yes.
Oh, that's...
So because you're about to ask, we are pivoting into something that is a very controversial.
Do you guys try to stay away from that where you are?
No, I think it's something we need to take head on. And by the way, it's something that I get a lot of flack for my position on that, because and we can get into that. But I do think that we need to take something into context here. Everybody says, well, at least when Trump was president, there were fewer wars. There weren't. He actually bombed, what do you call it?
Syria?
No, the other country that Saudi Arabia keeps bombing, Yemen. He dropped more bombs on Yemen in his 4 years than Obama and Bush did in 16 years. That needs to be understood.
In Yemen specifically?
In Yemen specifically.
Okay.
And in Afghanistan, he is so far the only president to use the
bunker buster.
Yeah, the replacement for the daisy cutter or whatever it's called. That's like the strongest, the biggest explosion short of a nuclear weapon. He's the only one to use it. He used that in Afghanistan. He assassinated an official in Iran. So, to say, oh, yeah, well, he's a, 30-style isolationist, so at least if he's president, there's going to be less war. There's not going to be less war. There's just going to be a different shift in war. He's proposed a Huckabee as ambassador to Israel. And who's the guy, the Fox News guy that's being accused? Hegseth. Both of them.
I have a strong opinion about that.
Both of them support tearing down the existing mosque that's on the Temple Mount, that is supposedly where Muhammad went flying into the sky.
Al-Aqsa.
And replacing it to build the third temple.
Which is in the Bible, this whole path.
Right. That's the whole idea, is that we'll be in end times, and that's why these people particularly want that. Now, I don't think Israel is going to really push for that. Judaism doesn't really do animal sacrifices or anything anymore.
I thought they were looking for some sacred colored cow or something so that they could do... Have you heard anything about that?
No.
I don't know.
Some colored... I don't know if it's a cow. Some colored animal that is... also in the Bible that is part of some sacrifice that has to be done, and they've been trying to breed it.
I don't know, but I know that
I'm reaching way back.
The Revelation says that the temple will be rebuilt, and this generation shall not pass before Lord our Christ reappears. And so they want to bring that. They want that to happen, right? And this is insane. that he's applying that. But that's why he moved the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem the last time around. So it's just, we're looking at more war here. But what he's going to do is he'll try to negotiate a peace, try to get somebody to speak for the Palestinians that's not Hamas, and then what will be involved is a permanent or a long-term military occupation under martial law, and then there'll be suicide bombs will once again replace the missiles. I think that's what we're in for here.
I feel optimistic that he can end Ukraine. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but I feel that Israel is going to be escalated, which is worrying.
Yeah.
Did you actually have a Israel question that we?
No, I was just interested in your guys' stance on where we're at.
Now, I want to say,
More
where I
broadly,
get into trouble with the left, David doesn't get as much trouble as I do, but I get yelled at on the Facebook Humboldt Progressives, is I support a two-state solution. I think that the Jews have just as much of an indigenous claim to the land as the Palestinians, the term Palestinian referring to all Arabs who are living there as of the turn of the 20th century. And I guess who moved in afterwards. There was a big Egyptian mass. But I support the two-state solution. I support Israel's right to exist and defend itself. And I do not regard what has happened there as genocide. I say war crimes, and I get attacked saying, well, when you say it's war crimes, you're basically defending genocide, which is a stupid fucking thing to say, but that's what they say. But so I take a different position, though. I do think that Netanyahu is trying to stay in power so he can stay out of jail, and he doesn't want his coalition to fall, and so he's basically catering to extreme right people in the Knesset and in his government, but my hope is to see a Palestine that is West Bank and Gaza, and in Israel, and maybe 100 years down the road, if they haven't been shooting at each other for a couple generations, there'll be a possibility for a broader state that they can merge with, but they're not at that now. And so, but in the meantime, when you've got leftists here saying from the river to the sea, okay, maybe that technically allows for the two-state solution because we're talking about Palestinians being free. But the point is that it originated with right-wingers in the Knesset saying from the river to the sea will be Israel, and then Arafat countering, no, it's going to be Palestine. And it's it's a crazy situation, but I having looked at the history of it, I do think that Israel was necessary for the survival of the Jewish culture. That is important to them. People, the biggest population moved there and came in the 30s during the Holocaust because we weren't letting them into our country. Britain was letting in maybe 12,000 a year, but they had to go somewhere, and where else were they going to go? And they do. You can't deny that they don't have a connection to the land. So this is where one of those issues that gets in trouble with me, with the left, with my parents, with my aunt and uncle, and the rest, because Zionism began as a left-wing movement. By the way, it was socialist. Right? The Herzl was a socialist. Ben Gurion was a socialist. Golda Meir was a socialist. For the longest time. So I think that that's what needs to happen. I'm just worried that the Trump administration, I think that Harris, unfortunately, I wish Harris had just had the courage to say, yes, two-state solution, and yes, I'm going to pressure Netanyahu to stop the fucking killing and the rest. But she couldn't do that. She was trying to had too many moving parts and trying to make everybody happy. And I think that was a factor in her loss. But I think that Palestine would have been better off with her win, clearly, than is going to happen with Trump, who probably doesn't really care what's happening there, but is willing to cater the religious right that thinks that this is going to bring in the end days, and that fucking terrifies me.
That's the factor that worries me, is the religion aspect.
Yes. Yeah. So just for the record, there could be, maybe a half hour of us building the foundation of this conversation, history and terms. Another half hour of recent politics, and then maybe we get to where we're about to be, which is sort of armchair quarterbacking what we see and what we expect, right? So I'm cutting right to, there's a lot of unstated premises.
And that's
here.
conservative, those
Yeah,
half hours.
yeah, exactly. Especially because people don't agree on terms. And anti-Semitism is a real problem, and it's also a term that is unnecessarily divisive in the sense that any criticism of Israel, that's the boomerang.
It's
Right.
like racist nowadays.
Yeah.
But see, in identity politics, what we say is, well, you have to let black people define what is racist against them and Latino people, but the same people who make those arguments don't accept that for Jews who say, hey, if you attack Israel, you're attacking me. I don't think they're really saying that, most of them, but the point is that, a lot, probably about 80% of Jews in the United States of America feel some connection to Israel. And so if you're telling them that state doesn't have a right to exist, is it anti-Semitic? I don't think so. I think that I think we need to move away from all identity politics that end those. It's a wrong way to say, oh, well, since we can say it for other groups, we can say it for that. But sorry I interrupted you, Dave.
No, it's fine.
I
appreciate it.
I want to make that point.
Good
I
context.
do believe that there is anti-Semitism. I think there was anti-Semitism in those demonstrations over the summer. I saw some up here. The fact that Los Bagels was vandalized, only reason being because it's a Jewish-owned business, when in fact that the person who actually owns Los Bagels probably agreed with the people who were vandalizing it more than nothing. Dennis Rael, that being, so it's but there is anti-Semitism on the left, just like there is racism and everything else. Now, what do we do with that? And how do we move forward with it is fine. But I just think that the only possibility is people say, well, the two-state solution is impossible. Well, there's nothing else that's possible. You've got two nationalisms.
Do you think something else is possible?
Sure.
Well, what do you think? Well, okay, that's halfway humane, but go ahead.
Right. I'll say this. When we've talked before, I try to limit it to, and I've talked to lots of people about this, but very rarely on air. It's the case that U.S. law and international law want people who are in a humanitarian crisis to get humanitarian aid, right? And right now we're in a situation where because of the war, because of the attack of October 6th, because of the ongoing many years of attack, we're at this place where humanitarian aid is not getting delivered in a way that is reasonable. So it technically, on top of the atrocities that are human rights violations and for example, the collective punishment, the tactics and the on the ground reality of Israel's response, right? Like that situation right now, people are giving Israel, leadership, world leaders are giving Israel free rein, in effect. Netanyahu and his cabinet giving him free rein. That their choices of how they are responding have crossed lines, and to continue to prevent aid is highly problematic. But parallel to that is, in this country, anybody that says that is vilified. So we have no space. We have space, but very few people have space to even talk about this.
If you're in office,
which is its own problem. One of the things I pointed out was that the State Department did a study and said, hey, the United States is losing credibility across the Muslim world. What are some of the assets that we have? What are some of the things we could do about it? And when this is before October 6th, they said, hey, you've got Vice President Harris, who's a person of color. If she just comes forward in a goodwill gesture and says, according to agreements that are in place and U.S. policy, we have a vision of a two-state solution, and the United States is going to be a partner for peace with our allies, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan. We will collaborate. We will make investments. We will make a future possible.
Right.
when Israel and the United States can make this happen, this is a priority. I'm speaking to all people about some peaceful vision of the future. That's a State Department off-the-shelf strategy during the Biden administration that didn't happen. So what I was saying is that Kamala Harris is being challenged from the left of saying like, "Hey, you're abandoning the Palestinian people, and the more importantly, your left-leaning Democratic base wants to hear from you on this." And she said a couple things, but it wasn't like I'm a leader and United States is always investing in peace. Like we're the ones that are going to be the people doing this. Didn't happen. So why?
I mean, what I think she should have said was, yes, I support military aid to Israel because Israel is surrounded by hostile powers, but there are limits to that. And if they continue to commit war crimes, then we're going to have to reconsider that relationship. That's all she had to say.
That's not on the table.
No, I know, but
and would anyone have believed that? I mean, you look at the track record of the Biden administration; every red line has been crossed.
I'm willing to bet that Harris would have done it. But she wouldn't say it. I'm willing to bet that Harris, if she had been in office, would have called up and first privately said to Netanyahu, "We're going to be taking a stand here that you don't like. Here's your chance to put an end to this." I think she would have done that. Biden was wimpy about it. I think Harris would have done that, and then publicly, if there wasn't a good response from him, would have said that. But she didn't say. She was sending codes, signals. Well, I hear the Palestinian suffering when Biden wouldn't even talk about Palestinian suffering. Yes, we're going to advocate for this stuff, but she didn't say we're going to be hard ass about it. She needed to convey that somehow and do that. Now she was in a rough position being VP. She can't undermine the existing policy, but apparently Humphrey did that in 1968, but it also started a civil war within the Democratic Party. It's a tough one. The vice president has a real hard time because they are still part of an administration, but she didn't have to say that much to do it. She needed to take another one, but again, maybe it would have helped her win in Michigan. I don't know that it would help her in Pennsylvania or any other state.
For me, it's part of any issue she could have taken leadership on.
Yeah.
This one would have been really important, and it didn't happen. But what I started to say is why? Like, why didn't she say those things, right? And it's almost like if it's your brother, right, or your sister, your mom or your dad, you're not. If you have an interfamily problem, you talk in the family. If it's outside the family, you don't let them know that you've got a problem because you're a family, right? So post World War I, end of the Ottoman Empire, the global leadership decides they're going to carve up some borders as part of this process. The first couple plans are like, well, I don't know about this one. I don't know about that one. And then ultimately you see the final map and Israel's on the map. Well, it's a creation of the West. It's our responsibility. Regional peace is our responsibility. All the countries of that region were drawn by the West for our own needs.
Arbitrarily in some cases.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so fast forward to, I've had people complain that I just paper over so much of history. I'm doing it in the name of time, of course.
Well, there's so much. There's
exactly,
too much
right?
history.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when I did it with Ukraine once, someone called up and was like, angry, right? Like, I just don't want people to be angry that we're papering.
Just don't look at the comments. You'll be fine.
Skipping over to the point of now. There's a regional conflict. Iran, right? Iran is clearly the whole axis of evil. Like the idea that the three worst countries on earth include Iran from the perspective of the United States and the West, back from the Bush administration, right? Israel is that entity in the Middle East that is a democracy that has already proven its military might, 6-day war, just positions of strength in alliance with the West. And the United States isn't going to, has said, it's not going to have more troops on the ground than it already has, really. We've got troops on the ground in Jordan and in Iraq and in Syria, but only some defensive missile training soldiers in Israel proper. There's no regional war that's going to include United States troops, but we'll park 2 aircraft or 3 aircraft unit fleets around the region to help defend Israel with anti-missile technology, etc. So it's really a regional stability role that is the priority for the United States. And let Israel be the aggressor when it comes to Iran. So, like, for example, when they recently bombed
but
Iran.
That's an interesting point. If we're supposed to be there for regional stability and we're backing the country that is provoking the other country,
that's been a problem for decades.
Yeah, I mean, I think from the what's the word? We talked about political correctness. From the appropriate public conversation lane, Israel's neighbors have continuously threatened its existence. So you've got Hamas and you've got Hezbollah, and they are factions or affiliated with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which is, Iran's, Ayatollah is the spiritual leader of the country who has ultimate authority over all their decisions. They've got internal conflicts in Iran. So when I've spoken with people from Iran before, young people, modern people, they're like, our country has, awful theocratic leadership. We wish we were more modern. So the United States has this position that, like, hey, someday Iran will evolve, but right now they've got this awful leader who, in the back of their back pocket, is that they kind of are provocative. They have not built nuclear weapons yet, in part because they know that they'll be annihilated, but that could change at any time. The whole Arab alignment, like, say, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, the whole Gulf coalition, Gulf States coalition, Jordan, like the United States is tight with all those Arab Muslim countries. And so that's against Iran, right? So it's the Shia-Sunni schism from whatever, 9th century, whenever that happened, 8th century. And so that's a complex thing that the United States is kind of like, hey, this is a huge problem. Trump, all right? So Trump's Abraham Accords was to say, let's just agree with Saudi, because if you talk to the leaders of Saudi Arabia, they'll say, look, the two-state solution's already been agreed to in principle, but you guys got to advance this. So Trump administration said, hey, Saudi Arabia, if you just agree to let Israel exist, and these other, if you sign the Abraham Accords, and you're all just going to agree to let Israel exist, then Palestinian people could choose a new leader. Then we could continue to root out Hamas's influence in Lebanon, because Lebanon's a failed state right now in part because of this. So it's a highly complex thing when it comes to the day-to-day lives of all the people in the region. When you factor in that the Abraham Accords would have left out the resolution of the two-state solution, that's where, if you look at, various sources have said Hamas instigated its atrocity inside Israel because they felt like they were being cut out. And rightfully so. They're a listed terrorist organization.
What
right?
time period are we talking about?
This is now. This is last 2 years
because
ago.
Hamas had won the election in 2006 and became the leadership of Gaza. And the first thing they did was send 500 missiles into Israel.
Yeah.
No, I get what you're saying. A last ditch effort to try to remain on the board.
Say, hey, what about us? Right. And so all that, everything I just named, is already on the terrorist list. Yeah. Huge portions of the Iranian government and Palestinian Gaza leadership. And so when you look at Palestinian...
You mean West Bank leadership. Hamas is the Gaza leadership.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is these are people that are on the terrorist watch list. Okay. So the actual Palestinian Authority, one of my former colleagues was an advisor there, and you talk to them, and it's like, hey, the Palestinian Authority is just doing what they can do. They have very limited credibility in their own community because of, if you look at the map of West Bank, and you see like the shape, the outer border, right? But then you look inside the country. If you color-coded the sections where Palestinians are still allowed to live, it's like Swiss cheese. So it's divided up. There's these barriers, and there's these streets, and there's these, settlements that are Israeli settlements. So the right in Israel has slowly been building Israeli settlements all throughout the West Bank, delegitimizing the Palestinian leadership.
And then there's the younger generation doesn't even have a concept of the Green Lines of 1967.
Exactly.
And that there is a big push. The two major kibbutzim, the Artsy and what is it, Tapalm, I forget what it's called, but both of them have refused to settle across the Green Lines, but the public has lost all concept of that.
Yes.
And that's a problem.
So you could picture a Trump administration now say, look, we want this to be ended.
Yeah.
But so what does that mean?
It means you forcefully move what is it, 500,000 people now?
You talking about Gaza still, or West
No,
Bank?
West Bank, where
Yeah.
of the Israeli settlements on the West Bank. I mean, they did move settlements out of Gaza back in the early 2000s, but it was nowhere near as extensive. They'd have a hard time moving all of the Israeli settlements
So
out of the West
Israel
Bank.
did evacuate Gaza and then thought that would bring peace, but it didn't bring peace.
Right.
And so now they're like, see, we told you we can't have peace, basically, right? And then, so that's why there's a lot, I mean, again, it's super complicated, but when Eric said two-state solutions are really the only way, I think by law, it's the only way. By agreement, it's the only way. But I don't know if you guys are familiar with Seymour Hersh, the man of the massacre.
Yeah.
So he has very good connections, and he reports pretty regularly on this region. He says that we're going to see very, very soon some public affirmation of I don't know what the right term is, but abandonment of two-state planning, in effect. Basically, Israel saying that they will indefinitely continue to be the security of the West Bank and of Gaza.
As of Gaza.
Feels like we're already there.
Well, they aren't occupying Gaza yet. That's what's going to have to be negotiated, is that Israeli troops go in and occupy it the way it did 20 years ago or whenever it was.
Yeah, but does it matter if you already have troops throughout the area?
No, they're not. They're just bombing the hell out of it right now.
You know what we have right now in Taiwan, which is we agree to disagree with China.
Yeah.
China's like, hey, someday that's going to be China.
We're like, yeah, sure.
And we're like, okay, yeah, you can keep saying that. In the meantime, we're just going to continue for decades as if that's not true.
Right.
And then Biden's like, we'll defend Taiwan. Everyone's like, oh my God, he didn't mean that. That's not the U.S. policy.
Walk it back.
Yeah, we're walking that back.
I wish that was one case where I wish his advisors had backed off and let him do his thing. But anyway.
So let's apply that now to two-state solution. Sure,
Yeah.
Two-state solution is the ideal. It's what we really need. But let's just proceed with peace. With that, what I think is going to happen is let's just proceed with peace with our Muslim allies in the region, and basically continue to not have any kind of formal sovereignty over those regions. And so that may not be a tremendous problem in the short term because it's the status quo as you described. But that's not what I think the expectation was when the escalation started. When Israel was at war with Lebanon in the 80s and 90s, it was like almost 20 years, 82 to 2000. Hezbollah is still there, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like you're going to without actually a change of regime in Iran, you don't really get a true peace in Lebanon, Israel, Palestine territory.
I don't know if that's true because Iran does finance Hezbollah and to some degree Hamas, but it's not like revolutionary quote unquote movements and guerrilla movements can't find support elsewhere if they're cut off from one thing to another. They find ways to get money.
And to be fair, Elon did already reach out to the UN ambassador to Iran and just which is funny that we're saying Elon Musk, but he actually did already hey, what do we got to do?
I think we need to refer to this as the Musk administration. That's just that's how I see it at this point. So maybe that's for the better, maybe that's for the worse. Will he allow Trump to go on his revenge tour or whatever? We'll see. But that's
have you heard much about Palantir, the company Palantir, Peter Thiel's company?
Loosely.
Yeah. So high-tech AI, all sorts of cutting edge technologies.
Right.
Peter Thiel, JD Vance was one of his staff members.
Is it Thiel or Thiel?
Oh, I don't know. I thought it was Thiel.
I thought it was Thiel.
I thought it was Thiel too. It might.
Yeah.
Well,
I know it's spelled.
It might well be. And I actually met him when we were kids, by the way. But I'll tell that story in a minute.
Yeah.
Chess tournament.
So JD Vance is now next in line to be president, and he's one of Peter Thiel's proteges.
Wonder Boys.
Yeah. And so between Elon and Peter, right? They're there at the table.
Oh, they made JD Vance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that. If you look at some of the software so Israel's got its own intelligence technology that is cutting edge and off the
state of the art.
Yeah, like
Pegasus.
Exactly. Yeah, there's a new documentary about it, just how it's. But anyway, one of the software packages that they have is called Where's Daddy? And basically they can use phones for the Israeli military to target their offensive weaponry. So Israel has a right to defend itself. Everybody in the world agrees, and that they ought to be, free to do that. But now at this point in the process, they're actually saying, well, any single person who is known to be have said anything bad, we could just use their phone, and then so AI is targeting individual people at the phone level. And then it's supposed to go through a human being whose job is to say yes, no, yes, no, yes, 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 right? And so it's that cutting edge AI warfare is happening in an experimental basis. And so it's only like 3 degrees of separation if you're like, well, it's Trump, Vance, Thiel, right? Like so Israel's in this situation right now. It's nobody. There's no good solution. But at the same time, that said, we still need to be defenders of the values of humanity, of the fact that so many of the people being targeted are like on the same block, right, as the person who we want to target. I think that this is like in World War II, Germany was bombed into full capitulation. I think the position right now, the unstated position, is full capitulation or nothing.
At any cost.
Yeah, like somebody needs to step up and say, we're not resisting anymore. And that's just not happening. And that's why I think we're not seeing peace. I mean, I've never said this out loud publicly, but if you're in the room, like the Qataris and the Egyptians and all these people are in the room with U.S. leadership and Israel's leadership, and they're just like, look, they still just want to keep sending rockets. Look at Hezbollah bombing Israel daily still. So it's an active war. It's an asymmetric war. It's a massively imbalanced war. It's a tragic war. At the very least, the United States, I think, should stand up for our values and say, we need to, like, people are starving. There's no water. There's going to be
kids are being blown up.
Yeah, like there's massive tragedy. For how many total Hamas people ever were there? Like 30,000 or something. And how many are left? Last I looked, Israel said they got rid of about half of them.
And that's probably not even true.
Oh yeah, they're going back into northern Gaza, supposedly to root back out Hamas.
It's probably more like 5,000 to 10,000 that they've actually taken out. Although Hamas has probably recruited a lot of people who have nothing to lose at this point. But
so full capitulation comes from like legitimate overtures of peace, and it's just in the current climate that's not happening. There's not a plan like that makes any kind of sense, and so or that we've seen rather publicly. So I think that the next administration is just going to say, well, let's just pick up where we left off with the Abraham Accords, try to maintain some kind of regional stability, knowing that the real enemy is Iran. So this is a very, very long way of saying that the left, like getting back to domestic politics, right? So the left is like, we need a boycott. We need a weapons boycott. We need the United States to say X, Y, and Z, do X, Y, and Z. And they're just being like, hey, you guys are, the response is that's anti-Semitic because Israel's existence is being threatened. So humanitarian assistance is being marginalized. But I think like not that I expect this out of the Trump administration, but true leadership would just kind of step up and say, we're part of the rebuilding plan. That's what's next. And we made peace with Saudi Arabia, who said they're going to fund most of this. And Egypt is going to be, taking care of their side of the border. There's private security forces that are going to take care of the, Palestine. Like a plan, point to the plan, and then bring in buy-in. It's the domestic politics of cut off Israel. That's just not. It's a non-starter. Almost like I said earlier about NATO expanding towards the new Iron Curtain, so to speak, which is literally just the border of Russia. I don't think it ever was going to be the case that the West didn't make clear that they were not going to let Western Ukraine, for example, was part of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire. People that live in Western Ukraine, their language is closer. They understand Polish better than they understand Russian, right? So there is Western Ukraine is Eastern Europe.
Well, Kiev was also the seat of the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
like if we're
yeah.
So
not the Soviet Union.
So real
the original
quickly,
Rus
before we run out of
Empire,
time,
not Soviet Union.
I want to tell my Peter Thiel.
Oh, go for it.
Oh,
go for it.
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Did you have anything you want to wrap up there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just say one last thing. That the United States is like, it's a bad metaphor or simile, but elbow deep in the patient without our face on this thing. And it's until Israel says, or until Netanyahu's regime loses popularity, which just flat out isn't happening.
They're losing popularity. They're just not losing power.
Like there's a huge global Jewish for peace population that has not enough influence in the U.S., not enough influence in Israel. So it really comes down to that, at the military, at the strategic level, it's only going to end with full capitulation. And unfortunately, I don't think that's in the cards yet.
That's where our support is a double-edged sword, is because would Israel have gone this far if we hadn't continued to back them at each crossing of the red lines?
Our military aid to them accounts for about 2% of their GPD. I don't think that's the factor. I think they would do it.
You don't think our ships shooting down incoming rockets?
No.
Our support?
No, I don't think so, because they've been on their own before. 1967 war, they did it almost exclusively with aid from France under de Gaulle.
Yeah, but every European country has started to shift against them.
Yeah, no,
France included.
I agree, but they've got their own military industry now. I think that they would regret it. I think it would have an impact on them, but I think they could continue it, sustain it.
Just knowing that and not to oversimplify, but Secretary of Defense, the new guy, what's his name? You know,
Pete Hegseth.
Hegseth. I always pronounce it wrong.
I think, don't quote me on that.
Oh, okay.
I think it's Hegseth.
Yeah. So I've seen a video of him where he said, hey, the formation of Israel was a miracle. And them winning 67 war, miracle. And he said that the rebuilding of the temple, I don't know how it's going to happen, but it's going to be a miracle. So they are flirting with that evangelical.
I mean, he may not make it in because he might be a rapist. We'll find out. But anyway,
his tattoo on his arm is the first crusade. Yeah. God wills it.
But supposedly that of the time that he got that was all big in the military. Like, I don't know if there's too much to be read in that. He's also got that cross, the Jerusalem cross, I believe. I think that was just a military thing at the time.
It's on his body.
Right now. I'm not making fun of the tattoos. I'm just saying, like, he said that no,
he's definitely full sail on Israel, which is interesting.
All right.
Peter Thiel.
Thiel. Okay, so I'm a pretty good chess player. As a kid, I was really good. I attended Cunha Intermediate School in the mid-70s, and the Burlingame Chess Club, which I would attend later in high school on a regular basis to play tournaments with adults, was sponsored these youth chess events that were also sponsored by George Koltanowski, who was the columnist at the Chronicle. He was a Russian immigrant, had a record actually of blindfold simultaneous chess, played against 52 opponents, won 50 and drew 2. He was good at that. He wasn't as good, at over the board stuff. He wasn't really that accomplished as a master, but he would sponsor these events, and I benefited from it. I was going to Cunha Elementary, which is over in Half Moon Bay, over the hill from the rest of the hill. But the best players seemed to come from a Foster City high school called Bowditch. And Dean Mao, he was born in Vietnam, but he was a really talented kid. He and I were rivals because we held these tournaments, and I would win one and he would win one. And in the 8th grade, we tied. So we both basically were considered to share the San Mateo County championship. We were beating the high school students who were over us. We thought we were hot shit. All right. All of a sudden, in his school in Bowditch comes this 6th grader named Peter Thiel. And he just started kicking ass. I mean, and both Dean and I played against him in the club, and he just crushed us. I mean, I managed to win one game because he was really distracted because everybody was talking. He was a nerd kid, even worse of a nerd than me, which is saying something. And so just getting attention and stuff, I managed to beat him one game because he got distracted. And if he had been focused on the game, I wouldn't have won it, right? So I shouldn't even count that, but I do because, hey, I did it, right? And so anyway, he was absolutely the bomb. He actually was thinking about his father, I think a Russian immigrant, I'm not sure, or an immigrant from Eastern Europe, wanted him to be a master, and he studied for it and probably could have gotten to be a professional, but he decided to go into high tech instead. He's right there in the Bay Area, right? Invented PayPal and all that kind of stuff. And this is before, he's advocating that women shouldn't vote because they're like, biologically socialists or whatever and the rest. But I remember him as this really nice, quiet kid. He would come in, he'd look up at you, he'd shake your hands and everything like that. But but no doubt, and as much as Dean and I both, Dean said, "Oh yes, I've been shamed. This little brat comes in and I can't beat him." And it's just like he was way over us, over our level. I was good. I almost got to like the expert level in my ratings or something, but no way was I going to be a master. Even if I had dedicated all of my life to it like he was at that time. But I just say I saw no signs of his politics of this at the time. Now, I don't remember him interacting with any girls. There were girls who played in these tournaments, and I played against a couple of them, but I don't remember him actually interacting with them. So I don't know, where he got this attitude towards women, but you wouldn't have guessed it from him. He was so happy to have attention back then. Anyway, I just, wanted to let it know that's probably my closest celebrity relationship type thing in that, because it wasn't until years later that it's like, wait a minute, is that the same guy? And sure enough, I go to Wiki page, and yep, he was raised in Foster City after he moved from whatever country he was from. But it just totally, this is why I say, okay, we've got to really think of the human side, because I thought of him as a really nice kid. And he was. And he just doesn't seem as nice anymore, but maybe in person he is, I don't know. But the fact that he wants to create floating utopias where women have civil rights but not the vote because they all want to be socialists, it's like, if women wanted the country to be socialist, we'd be socialists by now. They're the majority of voters. But I just wanted to mention that little anecdote. It wasn't until, for a while I thought it can't be the same kid. But then I learned, he was raised there. It's a fascinating.
Worked out for him financially, at least. He's got a couple billion.
Well, he would not have made that much money playing chess. Definitely, I think he made the right choice financially. I just wish he had stayed to chess. Maybe he wouldn't be having so much political influence. But I don't know. Maybe he would. Koltanowski was a reactionary, So, and he was sort of the influence over all of us. I mean, right about this time, Anatoly Karpov was in a championship game against Viktor Korchnoi, who was a Soviet defector. And I just didn't like the coverage on the radio of Koltanowski. It was like making Karpov out to be a red menace. And I'm like, he's just a player for one thing. He's, he doesn't have any political say, probably kisses up so that he can, be at the time. But he was actually the one who was supposed to play Bobby Fischer after Bobby Fischer won. And, I played chess because of Bobby Fischer, right? He turned into a total weirdo, by the way. But he was from World War II until the mid-90s, the Soviet Union won all of the championships, world championships, except for when Bobby Fischer broke it. And he defeats Spassky. He's a young guy, but then he didn't play another single game, professional game after that, and then walked out against Karpov because he wanted to have a rule where if he lost the match by 1 point, that Spassky would get the prize money, but he would still be champion. And it's like, who the fuck is going to agree to that? That's just
chess is out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah, it's just, so it's just anyway. So Karpov became champion by default, and then was up against Korchnoi, and it's just like, and so I don't know if Peter Thiel was caught up in all of that. I don't know that I even want to call him a right winger. It's so far out there. It's hard to know what to call him, but definitely not letting the women have the vote is definitely something I'm going to have a hard time with with his ideology. But then again, look at the gender gap. There's definitely a gender gap in how they did this. It was, Harris lost because not quite as many women voted for her, but she still got about 60% of the women vote, right? This is men asserting their stuff, but there just needed to be a few more women because more women voted than men, but they didn't vote at quite the same deference. The black vote, according to the exit polls, but we'll get better data in the future because exit polls tend to be inaccurate. But according to the exit polls, Harris took about 85% of the black vote, which is, usually they get 88 to 90%. The Democrat does, so it's a little bit lower. She got, according to the exit polls, about 79% of the black male vote and 92% of the black women vote. That's a huge discrepancy, right? But of course, according to the exit polls, the majority of Latino men voted for Trump. I don't think that's going to hold up when we get better data, but it's going to be close. And
which is a big swing.
Yeah, it's a big swing. The only group that I know of so far where Harris improved on Biden's numbers was the Jewish vote, 68% to 78%. Was that because of Israel? Was it because, as some Jewish writers are saying, we have a collective understanding of the of what authoritarianism looks like in its early stages, and we're scared about that. It's going to be kind of interesting to see how that gets analyzed if that's confirmed by. The data usually comes out later when think tanks go in and they look at the voting patterns in different areas, and they can do it because it's really hard to get a representative sample from exit polling. It's just really difficult. You got to be there all day, and I actually was exit polled in Redway about 20 years ago, and so it's and so it's like, okay, what brought them to Redway? What statistical analysis did that? Well, they got to have some in Redway, right? But most of them have to be in it's just in the cities. So very interesting turn of events. I hope that I'm wrong about Trump's authoritarianism and what he's going to push, and whether or not, or even if he is authoritarianism, whether or not the people around him will allow him to be. It does look like Musk does seem to be in a little bit of charge right now. Will he stay that way, or will he go off the deep end and try to actually make good of his promise to bring military into the cities to shut down protests and make Kent State look like a picnic? I don't know. But
it's going to be an interesting time.
We'll find out.
It's going to be an interesting time.
Yeah.
Well, what do you guys think? Should we wrap this? It's been 4 hours.
Yeah,
really?
4 hours.
It is. We
put in some time today.
Oh my God. It's after 7.
Oh my goodness.
Do you guys want to plug all of your stuff, where people can find
Sure.
you, your other work?
Well, together we work, we do Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. You can see us on Channel 12 and hear us on 90 on KZH. We are looking to expand from it being just our two. We would love to have any conservative or moderate or libertarian or anybody who wants to join us, and so that we can have different patterns each week. We would love to create a media for discussion. Again, we said this on your last show. We do not want to embarrass anybody. We will not be trying to use our knowledge. Don't worry if you're not as knowledgeable as us. We want to make it a learning experience for everybody. So if you're interested in coming in and joining us for respectful discussions about politics, we would love that. We both also have shows on KMUD. I do All Things Reconsidered. The original manager, when I took that on, was worried that NPR was going to sue us, but the statute of limitations has run a long time, and I also do once a month Monday Morning Magazine, and Dave has a show too.
Yeah, so the radio show that we do together and TV actually for Redwood Wonk is it's on KZZH, like you said.
Right.
And that Redwood Wonk I think is national politics.
Yeah.
And like Eric's pitch is that we hope that there are people in our community who it's not a debate. We're not trying to be right or wrong
or earn points. Right?
Yeah. So I mean, there are people out there who want to
dunk on you.
Yeah, like that's not what this is about. This is about understanding, so the community gets a better understanding of things, and so other viewpoints are always additive. The show that I do on KMUD is called You Are Here, and it's the first Thursday of each month.
5 o'clock.
Yeah, 5 p.m. And you can find KZZH stuff and on Access Humboldt's archive
and YouTube.
And YouTube. Yeah, YouTube is probably the best place for that. And then the KMUD stuff you can find on the KMUD archive. So it's all out there.
Yeah. It's anyway, we've been doing this for a while, and but yeah, I want to make that pitch. We want to have a discussion with you. We're not going to try to humiliate you again or in any way. We just want to talk. So please join us. We had one, and then he was discouraged because certain friends of his didn't want him platforming us, right? And it's like, come on, we need to have more media discussions. More
discourse.
Right,
yeah,
exactly. It doesn't have to be like the three original, I'm Walter Cronkite, fuck you kind of thing. I want to go back to the days of William Buckley. I mean, he was an arrogant son of a bitch, and you could get mad at him when he was talking, but he invited people who could beat him in the debates, who made quick work of him that were at that time, and he would invite him back again because he was up for the challenge. But more importantly, he would hold forums where there would be 4 people on one side and 4 people on another side, and sometimes like the drug war was kind of a mixed bag. He was against the drug war, had another libertarian guy, and had 2 liberals on his side, and on the other side were 2 liberals and 2 conservatives that were for Reagan's drug war or some version of it. He would do this. And each person would go up against each other person, kind of a round robin thing, and then there would be like a collective discussions again. We need more of that. We need to not segregate ourselves from it. And like I said, if you feel like you believe strongly in something, remember that there's people smarter than David and I, much more knowledgeable, have a lot more time to put into it, that disagree with us totally. Right? So it's not, we're not about that. We just want to have a discussion. I just want to pull that plug out there.
All right. Thanks, guys.
This is great. We appreciate the time. Thank
Absolutely.
you for having us.
I always have a great time having you guys in.
Thank you.
Right on.